and he's like, if you get any information about a dragon called Heroica, I will give you my gold plates. And he doesn't want to. He hates it.
He hates it. He doesn't even like thinking about having to give it away. And he's like, he wants Lawrence to know it's a huge sacrifice on his
And
part.
Lawrence is like, listen, if we can get the heavyweights, it'll be cheap at the price. And Temeraire's like, sure, okay.
It never gets old.
It doesn't. Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of your favorite podcast,
Cat Butts, the podcast.
Unresolved Textual Tension. It's me, your host, Maria, and my furry co-host, Pumpkin, and my ruggedly handsome co-host, William.
Here's the thing, guys. I'm rugged, I'm handsome, but not as much as Pumpkin. Look at that. She's like an ambulatory Persian rug, is what I always call her, because she's just luxurious. But today, we're talking about a different kind of animal companion. We're talking about dragons. We're talking about the Napoleonic War. We're doing the second half of the Temeraire series, and I'm going to try to say Temeraire each time instead of Temeraire, because you know what it is? At some point, I thought I was pronouncing Temeraire incorrectly, and the correct pronunciation was Temeraire. And for some reason, that just stuck in my head, and that's why it is. But this series is by Naomi Novik. And we did the first 5 books all in one video, which was crazy, but you guys should go check that out up in the corner somewhere.
If he even links it. He might not. He's not going to.
I'll probably link it in the description, so go there if you're interested. Because what we said in the original video was that we really liked the first 5 books, but then the last half wasn't as good. I had actually not read it before because I lost interest after nothing happening in the Australian outback for a book, and so we decided to go through. We're going to be doing the last 4. We're doing Tongues of Serpents. We're doing
Crucible of Gold. Something of Tyrants.
Blood of Tyrants.
Blood of Tyrants. League of Dragons.
League of Dragons. The problems in this back half of the series are fairly... I had less world building issues with it than I did the first half, because by this point I was kind of used to it. But in terms of the plot and the character arcs, I think, I've said many times that sometimes authors have a problem where they have too much plot bread and too little character arc and thematic jelly to spread over it. And in this case, it is a thin layer, molecule. What were your feelings, though?
I actually like the latter 2 books more than the big issue, really. So the big slow one for me is the Australia book. I did like it better this time around than I did the first time around, but it still is just it is the worst of the traveling. Like, because travel sections are never the most interesting of a book. Very rarely, especially if you're traveling, and the Australia book is so much traveling. I did enjoy it better this time, partially just because specifically for Lawrence and his point of view, and him dealing with the being like cast out from Britain, and what does that mean for him? Is he going to become like a mercenary piratey person, like all of that stuff? The Incan one is okay. It is definitely more interesting than the Australia book, but it feels, and the thing is, it does tie in like plot wise to the rest of it. It just, I don't know. I didn't.
It feels
love
a lot like a side quest.
It feels super like a side quest, and I just really, because the thing is, at a certain point, I just want to know like what is happening in the actual war. And here I am trapped in the Incan, and I didn't like Will and I spoke about this, but how the resolution to the Incan book happens feels very like perfunctory and not earned. And then I like Blood of Tyrants a lot. It does have some really slow points. I feel like it picks up more when they get back to China. The Japan portion also feels like an unnecessary side quest, and it doesn't, like, that part really just doesn't feel like it affects the plot. I do really like parts of the Japanese portion, and like I like the Japanese dragons.
I like the drunk Japanese dragon who likes poetry.
Yeah, I loved her. She was so cute. And then the entire back half with the Russian campaign, very interesting. I very much like that. I like like how Russia's like, the worst of European interactions with dragons. Like, this is really shit. This is here to make Britain look better. And then I enjoyed the last book. I like that they go back to Britain for a bit. I like the reunion of Heroica and Dihern.
Oh my gosh.
It's so
Oh my gosh, that
cute.
was the best part. He was so
Isn't it the
happy.
fucking best part? I hate the whole Miss Mercalite part.
I thought it was
It
hilarious.
is hilarious, but I'm just like, guys, can we move on? Like
It felt very, like, very Novicky at her most, which is, like, it's a funny thing, but it actually doesn't really go anywhere. There's an extent to which the books are, "Let's collect people and, like, Pokemon," and, like, that was the part that felt the most like it, and it doesn't really go anywhere. I'm gonna talk a lot about how thematically and character arc-wise, this last half does not go anywhere with a lot of elements. It does not have clear character arcs for the characters. So like in the Blood of Tyrants, which is the Japan one, there Lawrence gets amnesia, the main character gets amnesia just so that he has something to do that book, because otherwise he has no character stuff to go through. And like the last book really should be more of a meditation on what Temeraire is going to do once Lawrence dies. And so
it
like
should be. That was such an interesting little tidbit, and it like e- Tamara never actually has the realization that Lawrence is can just die for non
yeah, like he can
old
just
age is a thing.
yeah, and so, like, the Eroica thing and, Diurn and the hot German chick, like, he mentions that the reason he wants to marry her is because he didn't have a dragon for a while, and without a dragon, he doesn't wanna be alone, and that should have sparked Lawrence thinking about, like, okay, or even, Temeraire thinking like, "Okay, what am I gonna do once Lawrence is gone? And maybe
How
we
am
need
I?
some pillars outside of the relationship between the 2 of us to be less, like, needed," but, like, it doesn't really go anywhere. Again,
It
there's
does
there's
not.
I think part of it, the limitation is that Lawrence is we are so distant from Lawrence as a character in a lot of ways in terms of how Lawrence thinks about things. He's he's not the books or he is not really able to have him just think about sit and think and make character decisions almost. And it creates a problem where, like, he can't really have really momentous character changes in the books. The only time it really happened was back in book 4 when he made the decision to save the dragons and betray his nation, and a little bit in book 5. But here, we needed to get more intense with, Lawrence and his emotions, and it doesn't happen.
I would say book 5 needed more introspection from Lawrence. A lot of Lawrence's stuff that is happening is beneath the surface. Almost, and you could almost claim that in book 5 it's as if Lawrence is avoiding thinking about it, so he's just
Mhm,
robotically going through the actions. But then there needed to be more than just a one conversation with RK that like snaps him out of it and makes him realize it. And a book 6, honestly, the Australia book should have been much more, and it is a little bit like there is definitely Lawrence being like, well, what am I going to do now? What do I do with myself now? How do I make myself useful? But it is not as much as it should be, especially because of how close we are to Lawrence in the first few
mhm,
books. Um, and a part of it is Lawrence has to share screen time with Temeraire, who's absolutely fantastic and is also like growing and changing and like
mhm.
um taking on the mannerisms of ink and dragons and their relationships to people,
Uh-huh.
um, and all of that. But there is a lack of like a, a little bit of a lack of depth to the emotionality
Mhm.
that is interesting because normally that is something Novik goes hard on.
And it's also something where yeah, it's true, especially and even to an extent a little bit too much, I've said in the Deadly Education books or, the other books, her girl books for girls, where she'll just, like, have characters sit and think a little bit too much, but here, it's like a a a situation will come up that challenges Lawrence, they have to travel a lot, and then he makes a decision at the end of it that actually isn't a very strong action, and so him not thinking about it makes it less of an important decision. So at like one point he makes the decision like, okay, we're not going to fight the African dragons in Brazil, but like that's not it's theoretically a strong action, but it doesn't feel strong on the page, and part of that is because he does not have a moment you don't feel it from his perspective that he has made this emotional decision and it is like tearing him apart or not tearing him apart, or it's kind of just distant, and I think that adds to a certain amount of flatness in the emotional register. That is a good term, man. I'm smart. Of the books, and in this last half, and I think it was less of a problem in the first 5. Though again, you're right. In the 5th book, it's a little the 5th book can be read as like a little subtle. Like he does have that moment where he sees the king and he's like, "Oh my," like that hits because it's an
Yeah.
action that's very loud. But
And it
it's
also matches that he's trying to avoid engaging with what happened,
yes.
which he is actively trying to avoid. It's honestly really weird because he has a clear arc in the first 5 books. Like, there is a
Mhm.
clear arc of him going from proper sailor to who would never eschew an order to someone going, "No, that is not right. I cannot in good conscience do that. I must be like I can be a soldier and I can be devoted to the king, but I'm not going to make decisions that are terrible, or I'm not going to be part of those
I think it's
decisions."
because he's so buttoned down. What you said it right is correct. He made this huge decision in book 4. Book 5, he's trying. He's kind of flat. He's disassociating. He's trying not to think about it.
He
Book
had been
6,
prepared to die.
exactly, and then he keeps being kind of weirded out that he's not. And then in book 6, he needed to kind of blossom in terms of his emotions. Emotions needed to get bigger, and he needed to learn how to control, not control those, but deal with that. And that's done a little bit in book 6, but it's not done a lot.
Yep,
Again, Novik has this habit of mentioning things and then them not quite coming to an interesting conclusion.
yep. And I definitely feel like that is the case. And also, like, he should have embraced, I felt like in book 6 more, because there's this moment at the end where of book 6 where Lawrence has decided to like not be part of, like, not even try be part of the core anymore, and he's literally, him
Mhm.
and Temeraire are literally just building this giant pavilion for Temeraire, and Lawrence has gone full like backwaters country look.
Mhm.
Like, he's got a big beard, he's wearing a hat, dirty clothes, and someone comes to find him and doesn't even recognize him. And I would have liked a little bit more of, because you cut, like, it ends with him doing this thing, going on this journey, and then it cuts, and then we have like unkept, unshaven Lawrence just doing his thing. And I'm like, the other thing is because, like, there's this moment in the last book where you realize a huge thing that has been weighing on him is the concern that
Oh yeah.
General Roland would never forgive him fully, or never, because like, and the problem is, it is a beautiful scene in the last book where she was like, "Would you like to stay the night?" And he's like,
Fuck yeah, I would.
but he's also like, "Are you asking what I think
Oh
you're
yeah,
asking?"
that's true.
Because he's unsure. He's like, he thought she would never touch him again because of his betrayal, and but that was never something he thought about previously
Mhm.
in the books. Like, he got letters from Jane. He like,
He never saw it and really mulled over it, and again, I think that's somewhat, Lawrence has a very sort of British perfunctoriness to the way he thinks about things. They're very sort of forthrightly stated, and then he moves on, and I think that's kind of a problem, is that he needs to mull over things a little bit more to have the opinion. But you're also right in that he just never mentions it. He
it's
never is like, "Oh, she's not, we're never gonna," I was like, at that scene, I was like, "Oh, I thought for sure they were already back together, like,
yeah,
emotionally okay, and
exactly.
gonna
You don't
resume."
realize that, like, that he had assumed that she was going to be emotionally distant from him, because he never thought about it. It was never like, and there was never even a moment where he like wanted a woman, and this isn't a Lawrence thing, but it's not that he wanted a woman, but there should have been a moment where we're in his head where there's a side passing comment about him being lonely but feeling unworthy of anything.
Okay, so much of book Blood of Tyrants, book 8, is Temeraire like thinking like, "Oh, we need to get Lawrence a concubine." That should have come up so much more. He should have been thinking of Roland during those periods. He should have been like, "Look, my sex drive is really low right now," because that's what he says later. Is like he just hadn't. It's just without Roland, it just kind of went away. And like none of that is mentioned. It's a very weird thing.
Yeah, and Temeraire mistakes the lightness and the like new refreshed Lawrence that comes out of his night with Jane Roland to be him being happy that he got a really big promotion in the military, and it's not that. It's because, like, a weight has been lifted off of his shoulders so much that Temeraire can see a difference in him physically. He's lighter, he's peppier, he's happier than Temeraire has seen him in years. Years. And we never heard about this weight before.
We
Like,
never saw it. We never saw him mull it over. And so, like, yeah, I
and
think there
again,
needed to be.
someone might say British people don't like, they won't engage in this kind of sappy talk. Are you telling me they don't think about it? Because it's from his point of view and it's his thoughts.
He
You
should
don't
feel
think
it, even
about
if
it?
he's willing. You should be able to show that he's feeling it, even if he's not willing to really think about it for a
Yep.
long time period. Even some mentions of like he thought fleetingly of Roland and missed her scar, or missed her forthrightness, or just missed the
Or
touch of her.
as he was going to bed thinking about Temeraire's plans of getting him a concubine, a passing thought of Roland came into his mind as he
Lingered
went
into
to
his
sleep.
mind and would not
Yeah.
be banished. Yeah,
Like, or
it's
as he fell asleep, it was her face, like something. Because like the thing is, it's he does, I think, love her, and like the relationship is primarily sexual. But again, why, why, why? Like, obviously he loves her because he was literally like he
mhm.
never thought they would have this again, and he's literally a new man afterwards. So that
Also, my man Lawrence can serve, by the way. And we
he,
actually get we get a real sex scene in this book instead of a cut to black, which kind of like an uprooted.
it's not a real sex scene.
It's
It
pretty close. We hear about them like ripping clothes.
and that Lawrence finished early, and he's like, "I'm sorry for my dismal performance," and she was like, "Ah, give it a minute, and then you can try again." And you're just like,
Yeah, this is the second Nova character to have that problem, funnily
yeah.
enough. So
And it's also hysterical that she's like, "No, no, no, you'll do," because like it also shows that Lawrence cares.
That's true. No,
He
that's true.
ca-
He
he
also
cares that
he helps her out too in other ways. But the thing is, I think again the books needed to evolve in how Lawrence thinks about things and grows, because he's forced to, and because he doesn't grow into a greater emotional register, it doesn't quite go anywhere, and it feels off because it doesn't go there. Now, we have complained for a while about this book, but I do want to say that I read each of these books in a day. They're so readable. I
they're
still
so
loved
readable.
reading them. I read the first 3 a month ago because I just couldn't stop after we read the first 5. So I don't remember those super well. I did read the last one the day before yesterday, so that one I remember well. But, I mean, I'm gonna mostly complain, but they're still very good books.
They are. They're immensely readable. Novik is very talented. She makes things interesting and engaged. Again, the only book that I felt like was boring
Australia.
was Australia. And now one of our patrons, Lindbergh, uh, liked the Australia book. So you might also like it.
Really?
Yeah.
Lindbergh usually has such good takes.
Lindbergh continues to have good takes. People can have a difference of opinions or
Whatever.
what they enjoy. It just, there definitely is a clean sharpness and a uh, these books are at their best when they're closer to the actual core of the story. And because the thing is,
Mhm,
I understand what she's doing. She's very much exploring what having dragons would do to the global world
mhm.
if humans were able to have these relationship with dragons, and how like for instance, Japan is kind of like they're not really worried about people invading except for China, because China has a ton of other dragons. Japan does have dragons, including giant
A
giant
fuck huge water dragon that can just blast you with ocean water. It's so fucking
just like
cool.
monsoon, and just bigger than the biggest
Tsunami, the divine like, yeah, no, like the way they beat the Mongols. I think in this book it's literally like the dragon beat the Mongols instead of that massive storm that actually beat them. The kamikaze storm? I don't know, something like that. But yeah, also, and so again, what she's trying to do is like globalism, colonialism, the Columbian Exchange. How does this change things? And it's like, cool, but I want to get back to war, because part of it is she's just the way she writes military fiction is sublime,
it
especially
is.
after having read She Who Becomes the Sun, who is a military fiction book, but does not actually take any of the advantages of it, and is actually pretty poor at writing it. Like, this is so much better than that. Um, I think what it is fundamentally, I think the series she planned up through book 5, an arc and plots, and then it was like, okay, and then these are the cultures I also want to meet, and also then we got to finish the war plot. But she
Yeah.
didn't, and that's fine as a writer. You often start a series or a book not quite knowing how it's going to end, and just trust that you can figure stuff out when you get there. But she seems to not have been able to.
And it's just really interesting because I do find like the how having dragons would give, like uh America is much more influenced by the Native Americans because the Native Americans had dragons and had a
Mhm.
lot of dragons. And the like we weren't able to invade South America the way, or the British were, and the Europeans were not able to invade South
Spain and
America
Portugal.
and Spain and Portugal the way they wanted to, because they also had super they had
Big ass
dragons.
dragons.
Africa was able to, as a continent, just expel all the foreigners, just boom, gone. And it is fascinating, but unfortunately, it it doesn't mesh as well as it should with the Napoleonic War. Like, I
Mhm.
think it would have worked better to tell one of these stories, or if that was the route you were going to go, you should have told this book not from a British perspective. You should have told this book from one of these minority perspectives, going to other, and I don't want to say minorities because they're not minorities in their own places, but in one of these colonized. Okay, there we go. We're gonna You tell the story from one of these colonized perspectives, uh, and then they are to get allies going to other places that were colonized, and then we can see it that way, and then have it be like them versus Europe. And
Mhm.
go that route, or like maybe they're taken in by Napoleon at first, and then they realize no, he's not any better, um, and then that could have been the story.
Or
Or
even you have the Temeraire books, which are the Napoleonic Wars, and then you have another series of a guy who goes around to the other 4 or 5 cultures she wanted to see instead of trying to wrap them in. We talked in about how the Africa book feels like a side quest, but it does technically tie into what happens in book 5. In this one, all of the other cultures are like a side quest, but they actually tie in even less. Like Australia
except for
has
the
nothing.
Incan one.
Even the
Australia has
Incan one,
nothing. Australia does not connect at all.
the Inca one doesn't really, it connects a little bit, and, it closes a plot line that it shouldn't have. The Japan part of book 6 has nothing to do with anything.
There's one character who continues on, but then plot wise does not impact anything except that he told uh
Nothing that
uh
can't be replaced.
yeah, exactly. Like nothing that can't be replaced easily, you know. Like what's her face, the white dragon could have just had spies in China who told them about Temeraire's dragon. It didn't have to be the Japanese guy or Temeraire's egg. And so the Incan one, the only connection is Napoleon ends up marrying the Incan empress.
And then she, like, betrays him, which is cool, but also that could have been the Swana princess. There's no reason we had to go to the Inca for it, you know what I mean? That
Okay.
actually probably would have been a more interesting way of closing that loop because yeah, that actually would have been more interesting. I actually at one point, what I wanna do is have us do a rewrite of the Temeraire series, but replot it out, so, like, different, because I actually like the idea of England as almost like a North Korean state where they think they're awesome, but they're actually not that cool compared to all the other
Other
countries, and,
countries
like, them having to deal with that, and we could do
and
disturbance
coming
levels of
to
how much it
terms.
changes. Yeah.
And one of the things I found the most fascinating, and I hated how much time we didn't spend with it, was I was really, really flippin' invested in the dragon liberation movement of Britain. Like Pisidia, I was super interested in what she was doing and
Mhm.
how dragons were integrating themselves into society.
Again, I really love the series. I just don't think, I think she just ran out of things to do in these books, but also kept wanting to keep the form of them. Um, so yeah, do you want to launch into it? Like the first video, we're gonna kind of go through the plot pretty quickly,
Yeah.
especially some of the books where nothing happens.
So book one is transportation.
Well, hold on. We should recap what happened at the end of book
Oh,
5 and then
Book
go to.
5. Napoleon had invaded England, but then they routed him out and were like, "Get out, Napoleon," and they kick him out. So he cannot invade England. He goes to do other things. At the end of it, they're like, "Wow, thanks, Lawrence and Temeraire. You were heckin' useful. Temeraire got all the dragons to band together, and all the feral, all the beasts we had in training yards actually, or breeding grounds actually did stuff for us. And Lawrence, you were also very useful. Thank you. We feel bad and don't want to kill you now, so we're just gonna give you a sentence of transportation and you're gonna go live in Australia."
Bear in mind that, what had made Lawrence an exile was that the British were going to inflict a plague on every dragon ever, and Lawrence gave the cure to France, their sworn enemies. So he was like, and then he brought himself back to Europe or to England for justice. So it was a very principled stance, but it forced him to kind of betray the service that he had always wanted. And they're like, okay, we're going to kill you all throughout book five. And then they didn't. They're like, okay, you're going to go to Australia instead. And
Yes.
so book five thankfully starts with us already in Australia. We don't have to deal with like a bunch of traveling yet. And the situation in Australia is interesting because I'm assuming it's actually pretty historical, but basically, like, it's a prison colony, but the guy who was in charge of it was deposed because he was bad at his job by some people who want to like
Super bad.
expand and cultivate the land. And like they're trying to get Temeraire and the other dragons into like, okay, which side are they going to help out and which ones are they going to take the side of? Um, and this is the first time we're going to run into Novik setting up a really interesting situation, and then the
Just
characters lolling.
walking away from it. I was super invested in oh, are
Yeah.
they going to take a stand, or how is Temeraire going to help cultivate this land and make it better?
I mean, the thing about it even is that the eventual thing that the colonists come to is that, like, oh, we're not going to keep listening to stuff from England. It's too far away, but we're not those American colonies. We're still loyal to the crown. That's basically the stance Lawrence and Temeraire come to at the end of the book is like, we're still British, but we're not going to keep listening absolutely to what they say. But there's no thematic parallel drawn. And they're not like, this is how we're going to push the colony because this is what we personally believe. And the lessons we've learned in the first five books, they go fuck off to do some stuff and they come back and it's done.
And that's the thing is they're supposed to make a choice about what the like you think that the point of the thing is that they're going to have to make a choice about how they like who they're going to support, and then they just have to go on a separate mission, and by the time they come back it has already been established basically what is going to a little bit. There's the whole thing where like the one British guy is like, we're going to kill all the sea serpents, and then the Australians
The
are like,
battle that
nope.
doesn't happen in this book.
Yeah, and then the Australians are like, no, no, never mind, we're sending you back. But it all happens like I don't want to say passively, but that Temeraire and Lawrence are passive in the situation, and the characters that are active in the action there. It's similar to like how the really compelling story in the Africa book was the priest's wife
Mhm.
reclaiming her heritage, her life,
I
her
forget what her name
family.
is.
Um, I'm trying to remember.
Well, she actually has
I
2 because she has her Christian name and then she later changes it to an African name, and I don't
Yeah,
remember which is
I
which.
had her African name, but unfortunately, when she was in the Incan book,
Mhm.
and I read that a while ago, and
No,
so
the
I don't.
actual movers and active players in the plot are not Temeraire and Lawrence. They just sit it out. And, like, that could have been I don't know. It could have been so fascinating, but basically they get there and they're just like, yeah, we're not going to really go onto one side or the other. Thark Gay shows up and is like, hey, do you guys want to become pirates and raid the French ships? That would be useful to England and you guys could get a lot of treasure. And one thing I need to
Merchant
mention,
Marines.
merchant marines, and they're like, oh, this is a good way to doing battle for England, but also not having to be killed. And the one
And
thing I
also
do need to
not
mention
having to like listen to the British military.
is that dragons are obsessed with gold, and throughout the books it is constantly brought up that Temeraire is so sad that he lost Lawrence's fortune, and it's hilarious because like it should get old but it doesn't. It's still funny, like even more so than betraying his country. He's like, and he lost 10,000
Thousand
pounds, I
gold.
lost him his fortune. And like when Lawrence's dad dies, he's like, oh, he never learned that his son got a fortune again. It's so funny how like focused on it they are.
Yep. It's so cute.
And so one of the characters that does come up that I did like is Rankin from the first book. Rankin is a pilot, an aviator who abused his dragon and then his dragon died, and it was the first time that we got the sense that like, okay, there's a power imbalance here and that's not good. And in this book he shows up in Australia and is going to get a new egg. And Temeraire and Lawrence are trying to figure out a way like we can't let this happen. He's going to abuse the egg again. What do we do? What do we do? And I really liked this in that the egg hatches, and then the dragon is like very in control of the situation. He immediately comes out and asks Rankin before Rankin's gonna go put it on the harness. And he's like, What's the standing of your family? How many, how much, how many, what's your income in terms of pounds? Like, oh.
How what is your station? And Rankin's like, well, my family is from the aristocracy and we have this much money. And he's like, that'll do. I don't want, because Temeraire has been speaking to the eggs the whole time, being like, yo, you don't have to just take any Joe Schmo that comes at you. You can pick who you want. You're like, Temeraire is trying so hard to educate the eggies to make them, because they have other eggs. They're trying to start a new like base
Covert,
for
covert.
covet in Australia. So they came with 3 eggs, and he's trying, so he's like, listen, baby Eggy, you don't have to just take Rankin. He abused his other dragon. Like, you can pick what you want. But unfortunately, while listening to everything else, because the eggs can hear everything, has also been hearing about how there's not a lot of food, and Temeraire lost Lawrence's fortune, and how money gives you cows. And so the lesson the baby dragon takes away, which is hysterical, is that you need money. Not just, you can't just rely on the fucking core to make sure you're fed, especially here in Australia where there's nothing. You want a man with the money. And he comes out and he was like, okay, I'd like a cow now. And
And he's
because
manipulative in terms of like, oh, maybe I can't really go over there. I need a cow. And I just love that because you go in expecting like, oh, he's going to be a victim, and then you realize, oh no, dragons can have their own agency. You don't, and sometimes they can be kind of dicks, and like,
yep,
and I really liked that inversion the first time I read it, and this time as well. There is sort of an underlying eugenesis and victim blaming thread, if you wanted to choose it, in terms of he comes from a wild breed, so like he's not been domesticated, and there's an extent to which you could see it as like the Rankin's first dragon was like chose to be a victim in a kind of way, but I don't think that's really the message involved. I really think it's more about like, oh no, the dragon can be a dick, and he can, like, he's not dragons aren't passive, they're active.
yeah, and I think part of it is that his first dragon was just of a sweet temperament, and also had not been fed all of this. Like,
Hmm.
unfortunately, Temeraire's intentions did
He's a
not go the way.
libertine.
Yeah, and it happens again where Temeraire is talking to dragon eggs, and he's like, "I got you," and the dragon comes out and is like, "No, no, no,
That does happen 3 times in the book.
this
That
is
happens with
not the lesson."
Hysterica, that happens with Caesar, this dragon, and then it happens with Lian Len Sheng, I don't know, his daughter later. That's so
Like, it's
funny.
so funny, but anyway, and the nice thing about Caesar is Caesar's also super smart, you know.
Hmm.
And so, and but also coming from his dad and his mom, super motivated by riches. And one of the things, because Caesar's parents were the dragons from the mountain pass coming from
Ferals.
China. Yeah, they were these pharaohs. And uh his dad was like, make sure you get a rich whatever. And so one of the first things before Temeraire even spoke to him was the papa dragon being like, my egg can only have a rich person. I want him to have a rich person. So he's got this
And well,
obsession
on
with
top of this,
wealth.
he's also like his father. His father is a pharaoh who like kind of struts around and tells crazy stories and is very
Yeah.
much like a brigand. And then he's like that, but like a little bit more refined. And so you can
And
really see it. He's honestly one of my favorite characters. He's only in book 6, but I really liked him. And again,
he's
I like what he says
so
thematically.
great. And I also love that he makes Rankin think, he was like, ah, yes, a dragon should listen to their rider. You're absolutely, but he feeds into Rankin's ego, and acts and speaks proper the way Rankin does, and it makes Rankin fond of him in a way that his
Hmm.
first dragon, by just being sweet. And because the problem with his first dragon was uh he was just
Well, partly
sweet
he
and
wanted a bigger dragon too, I think is the issue.
yeah,
And
and it's
so,
just so funny. And also, he was just a courier, so he would just go and send messages. It's like a mailman having a relationship with their truck, and that's
can
how
I
he
just
saw his
point out,
first dragon.
in this is a little bit tangential, but in they're always like, oh, robots, if we get them, we're gonna treat them like objects, and that's gonna be terrible. And it's like, bitch, have you seen how attached people get to objects? I loved my first car. I would have died for that thing. I was so sad. There are like furniture people won't get rid of. Like, people actually grow really attached to objects in a way they don't even necessarily to people. There's that meme about how white people treat their dogs better than they treat black people. Like in terms of like people dying or
Yeah.
murder or something like that, they care about it more. And like, so I just think it's funny that like people are like, oh, they'll be objectifying. It's like, well, but that's actually, we're actually really nice to objects. I get what people are doing thematically in terms of, but it's like it's more people do that to marginalized groups than they do that to objects. Actually, interestingly
Yes.
enough.
The
Um,
parallel is there.
yeah, the parallel, but also, objects. It really should be more of a question of when they start trying to be autonomous, and that's like, well, what if your car didn't like you? That's a lot more damaging than like I'm gonna murder my car or like
Yeah.
mistreat my car. But anyway, so what happens next?
So you get all this interesting setup, like, oh, are they going to support the colonists or yeah, the colonists? Are they going to support England? What are the governor? What are they going to do? And then they're like, we would like you to find a path from this part of, because you have dragons, you can fly. We would like you to create a path so that we can take cows to where the pastures are and grass, and we would like you to go this way and find a route through the mountains and the shrubbery, and we're sending you with a bunch of prison convicts so that you can use them to clear the shrubbery and make the path nice and build a road.
I will say
And
Novik makes the fact that Australia is really hot and has no water, like she's so good at descriptions. Even I remember this in the last book. In the first few paragraphs, you get a sense for how frigid and cold and desolate everything is. She's
mhm,
so good at atmosphere and she's so good at making it like, oh yeah, they don't have water. This is a problem. It's
yep,
like it's dangerous.
it's super, and it's the wilderness definitely feels like this other, almost like baby steps for her, the forest and the woods in Uprooted. Like,
Yeah.
it definitely, there's times when they feel like they're being watched, and you get the idea that there's more intelligent life in the,
Something's lurking, which we'll find
yeah.
out what it is, but you'll be disappointed when you do. So basically, they try to find a pass through, and then the important part is that one of the dragon eggs, a
That
yellow
they have.
reaper, gets stolen by something. And dragons are super attached to eggs. Not so much young dragons, but eggs in general. Like
Yeah, they don't care. Once you're hatched, they don't give a
they care about
shit.
three things in life: food, gold, and eggs. And like those are the things they really care about.
And whoever they've claimed is theirs.
That's the other thing. So basically, Temeraire and Iskierka go and keep trying to find it. And the whole book, or a good third
Oh,
of the
also, I need to just make one point clear. Iskierka is only here because she wants Temeraire to give her an egg. She literally got on a boat, and she wasn't supposed to come to Australia. Like, it wasn't supposed to happen. Hysterical. Continue, Will.
Okay, so a lot of this book is them in the wilderness trying to track down this egg. Um, it's the Australian outback. It's so boring. The book tries to do some stuff in terms of the convicts are like a little like, oh, tension filled. Like, are they gonna like they're unruly? And then also something keeps eating the people when they go
People.
by. And it ends up being bunny yips, which are just like dragons without wings that can burrow. It's
They're like
extremely lame.
alligator dragons.
Yeah, they're alligator like
Crocodile.
dragons
They're crocodile dragons,
that can
but
like
smart.
burrow and they're smart, and that's kind of lame. The only really interesting thing is that one of the characters they picked up in book 4 was Demain and his brother. I don't remember what his brother's name is. It starts with an S, I think. Who are
Sifo.
Sifo are black. They're specifically from a tribe they picked up in Africa when they were there in that book. And one of the dragon eggs, everyone's like, oh, it's going to be really important. Like everyone wants to get a dragon, basically. And so when this dragon hatches, they find out that it looks misshapen and it can't fly. And like, so everyone's like, we should kill it. If it can't fly, like it's better to do it now than later. And what was actually one of the moments I really liked is like Lawrence is like, oh no, we can't kill it. And he looks up to Temeraire for backup, and Temeraire's like, but Lawrence, he can't
Can't
fly.
fly. Like, all the dragons are like,
It's almost like he doesn't have a soul in their eyes.
yeah.
And I really liked that cultural value that like to them flying is really important.
And so none of the aviators go to take this dragon. They're arguing with Lawrence, who's taking a very Christian point of view uh, towards it. And while they're doing that, Domain in the first, I hate that. I hate when audiobook narrators do that. Because in the first book, he says it Damane, which is how I still think of it. And then in the
Hmm.
books afterwards, he calls him Domain. But anyway, Domain, and gives him some meat and like puts a little rope around his neck and is like, I have this dragon now. And it's hysterical because, like, the entire time this dragon is just like, it's got these weird like sacs that are just like
Mm-hmm.
skin flaps that are on the outside. Its wings are misshapen, and part of the problem is its egg. It was a crossbreed between a
Checkered nettle.
checkered nettle and something else, and but the
I
egg
think
came out super small.
super small, and everyone's like, we should kill it. It's just taking up food and water. And like, he's so cute. He's like, I shall try to get bigger
Yeah.
quickly. I'll try to fly.
Or
I'll
I'll
try not
try
to
not
eat.
to be as hungry. Like, I'm trying. And then he's like, don't hurt me. And basically, by the end of it, he ends up growing a lot. Like, he grows and he grows. And at certain points, people are like, you really need to fly, buddy. Temeraire's been carrying him this whole time. But basically, what you discover, which the one doctor knew, but just
But just
didn't
hadn't
say
told
anything
anyone.
in
Yeah.
case it wasn't the case. So sometimes really, really giant dragons that are going to be massive have to have extra large air sacs inside them, because all the dragons have air sacs that they can control to control how high or low they want to be. So if they need to drop very, very quickly, they will expel the air out of their air sacs. And dragons who are going to hit like 25 tons or over come out with these giant air sacs that are deflated. And that's one of the reasons that because they are too big, their body is too big to fly without extra large air sacs. And so it takes a while for them to grow into their air sacs. And basically, he's like, once the air sacs inflate, the problem is we can't keep him down on the ground because, like,
He's like a
he gets really
balloon.
angry. There's literally a point where they're just like ballooning him around until he learns how to control, like, because eventually he has to learn how to like let the air out, take the air
Hmm.
in, flap his wings, and he's just like bouncing around. And
He's
it's
like a
basically
helium
like
balloon.
he's gonna be massive. And Temeraire's like, well, that's rude. I carried you around. I did all this stuff. The cheek that you're gonna be bigger than me, and it's just
It's great. The dragon is
so
called
funny.
Kulangile, by the way,
Yeah.
which I always pronounce Kulungile, but then Kulangile is a much cooler term. And then all the other aviators start trying to like steal him and stuff, but Domain keeps him. It's not. Oh, also Domain and Roland. Roland being one of
Emily
Emily
Rowland.
Roland being one of Lawrence's lieutenants are like having UST, not UTT, UST, where like they're like, man, we're fighting, but really we want each other type of a thing
Yeah.
that never goes anywhere. But and
Like,
that's
I was
really
expecting that to coming together, like in the
yeah.
last book. Like, why didn't we hear about like? Because even her mom was like, yeah, they should do it, but like it just doesn't resolve.
The last book is weird, and I'm going to talk about how I think she needed to keep. The last book is funny because I think she tried to fit too much into it. Because you'll also notice certain chapters just start in the middle of a battle, or
Hmm.
they'll end in the middle of a battle. Because I think she just didn't have enough space to write everything she wanted to. Because the last book has almost none of the regular plot or characters in it. Like
Yep.
Askerica is barely in it. Granby is barely in it. Tharkay is in it a lot, which I didn't love. But
He isn't even in it. Don't listen to him. Tharkay isn't in it that much. Like, he's just in it more than Will would like him to be.
I don't like him. And so basically that's all the interesting things that happen.
But
And
it's
they
just, I want to paint for you how boring it is, because we have just told you the interesting stuff. There is just chapters. So initially, the big chunk of boredom is them just trying to find water and flying around and trying to find water, and then trying to find things to eat, and then losing the water, and then Caesar's getting very thirsty, and Caesar gets heat stroke, and they're flying, and the convicts are saying things, and then the egg gets stolen, and Iskirka and Temeraire are like, we have to get it. So then it's just the two of them doing sweeps, looking for the egg, looking for the egg, just sweeps over the ground, looking for the egg. And then Tharkay is tracking and finds, like, oh, we found a path. But then, like, they're like, wow, whoever, because there's also smugglers bringing stuff from, like,
Mhm.
the, like, the inside of Australia out to the, place where they were, with like Chinese china, like and porcelain and goods and everything. And they're like, I wonder how they're doing this. And basically, they're tracking whoever has the eggs. They realize is the smugglers, because one of the ways they're tracking them is through pottery shards. And so it's just tracking. Oh, we found a shard. No, this shard is really old and it's not new, but it's probably that this is a path they've taken before. And sweeps, sweeps, sweeps. Where's the egg? Sweeps, and you're just like, end me now. And then, like, all the things we talked about are happening in between, but it's just so flipping boring. And then you get to the end, the egg's already hatched, because you're like, you become invested too, because
Mhm.
they've just been trying to find this goddamn egg, and then you get there, the egg's already hatched. It's been living a great life, and basically you find out that China has been doing trades, which is technically against the trade thing that the government made with Hammond uh, when they were there previously. But anyway, um, and the Chinese give them goods, and then all the different tribes,
The Aborigine tribes.
the Aborigine tribes, take the goods and bring it all the way through. But they needed a dragon. The reason they stole her and passed her along through all these tribes was so that she could learn the language of all the tribes. Because currently there's no one who can speak all of the, like, if they have to send a message to the first one, they have to send, this one can speak to this group, and then this group can speak to the next group, and so on and so forth. But now they have the dragon who can speak to everyone, and so she has no rider, she has no captain, she has no person, but she has all of these tribes that she considers her own. And basically when they get to the end of the road, they're at the coast on a different area, but it's the coast that's closest to China. And so there's like a Aboriginal and Chinese group of people living there, and they're getting the shipments from China through sea dragons, or what are they, serpents, sea
Sea
serpents,
serpents.
that they like put big things on, and they've trained them to come back and forth. And if you throw stuff in the water, and it's like fascinating, but you've been bored for so long, and then you get here and you're like, this was it, because like it has impact, because like the British are not going to be happy that China is doing this. And there's literally a part where a British ship comes in and wants Temeraire and
Lawrence.
Lawrence to kind of fuck stuff up, and they manage to not do that craftily. But again, there's so many times where there should be a conflict, and like them making a grand stand, and then the plot works out where they don't have to.
The thing is, the whole book has been building towards some kind of like a big confrontation when they find the egg, or a big battle. And then the battle just happens without them, basically. And it's like, oh, the sea serpents are destroying the ship, but they're not actually an active part. And I get
Yeah.
that there's a
And
certain
then
extent to
eventually they
which
help kill this sea serpent because it's killing the ship. Like they
and,
destroy.
and and so the thing is that like they don't really have that big of an impact on what's happening. And also I get the whole point actually is that they're supposed to not have agency in this, in that like there's a certain destabilizing quality to like, oh no, the Chinese are now kind of doing their own thing. England is no longer in control here, and that's destabilizing. And so maybe that's supposed to be mirrored in Temeraire and Lawrence not having an ability to control things. But like a lot of these books are that thing happening, and it just feels it's from a narrative point of view, characters need to be active and make
Because
changes, and they
yeah, because
don't.
there's so many times where Lawrence and Temeraire are like, we don't want to have to do this thing, and then the plot works out where they don't have to do the thing, like without,
Hmm.
but by being almost like I hate to say, but it's almost like there's too much diplomacy. Like in the next book, the Incan book, it happens at the end where like they're able to like,
It's diplomacy without stakes or sacrifice, I think is, well, not without stakes, but without sacrifice or complexity. We talked about how in one of in the China book, somebody is just like, hey, Lawrence should be adopted into the royal family to fix this problem. And then like later it happens. And it's like, okay, but that didn't require a sacrifice or choices or growth on the part of
yeah.
the
I mean,
characters.
and we're gonna, when we get to the Incan book, the whole reason it works out was because of sacrifices, not that they had to make or their party had to make, but that the Portuguese had to make, and
Hmm.
decisions of Portugal. Anyway, so that's the end of that book. They well, it's almost the end. Eventually, Lawrence and Temeraire decide to go back to this one really pretty valley that they liked, and they're raising cows and they're building a thing. And then Hammond flies on this really like long
Well,
winged
no, that's
sleepy
book.
dragon. No,
That's
no,
the, yeah.
this.
No, that's not. That's the beginning of book Crucible of Gold, the Inca book.
Oh, I thought it was the end of this book.
No, no, no. Because remember, he gets there and Lawrence has like a beard and shit.
Oh, okay. So next book, Hammond is flying on one of the really, 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 really long-winged, glidey Chinese dragons. He has air movement sickness. He's not doing great. But anyway, he gets to Australia.
Hammond is the British diplomat, for those who don't remember, who's like Lawrence doesn't like, but then continually likes when he then does something badass, like halfway through the book.
Yeah,
Like that
uh,
keeps happening.
it keeps happening. But anyway, so Hammond comes to get him and basically says, "We'd like to reinstate you into His
We
Majesty's
need to get you back
Air
in the
Force."
game.
Yeah,
You're the only guy for the job. Like that
and
scene, but
yeah,
British.
and we need you to go to South America because they are trying, like, this whole thing is happening. And basically what he finds out at this point is that the Swana dragons, who were the dragons that kicked out all the Europeans at the end of book 4. Book 4? Yeah, at the
Yeah,
end of
book
book
4.
4, um, have now sided with Napoleon because Napoleon has promised them that they can go to. He just sends them to places where their slaves or where their family might be and have been taken as slaves, and they can just take whoever they want. So Napoleon gets to point them in the direction of their anger and then reap the benefits of them going and fucking shit up. And the Swana dragons are like badass. We don't ever get to see it until the
The
like last
very
book.
end, the last battle of the
I
last book.
know! It's so insane. Like, I love seeing these different tactics, and like the Swana dragons, like they have people that they love, but like they are entirely. It's like the Incans. They're entirely in control of their own military.
Yeah, well, what happens is that they, their cultural belief is that they are reincarnated spirits of the people in the tribe, and so they are like, and so they belong to the tribe, but the tribe belongs to they are a member of the tribe in that way. So yeah, and it's funny because the prince of the Swana, like, he makes decisions, but you also get the sense that like if the dragons are pissed off, they're pissed off. They're gonna do. He has to bow
They're
to their
gonna do what
political
they're gonna do.
pressure.
They were like the Swana are in Portugal and trying to get back their slaves, and we need to go and try make a. We need to get to Portugal and do something. And they end up like on the way to because he gets on a boat with his Kirka and they're gonna go. But on the way to South America, their ship gets sunk.
So
Um,
this is a point where in the traveling books, I mentioned in book 2 that the tension between the crew and the aviators was really interesting, but then ultimately didn't go anywhere. They just kind of got along by the end. In this case, the tension between the crew and the aviators and the upper class of the ship does go somewhere. They get greedy and like blow up their ship by accident because they were mutinying. But the problem is that like this is just a retread of the tension in book 2, and so it kind of feels a little bit boring. So
yep,
it's an example of like a better version of the plot, but by virtue of it being the second one, it's not as interesting. And so
yep,
they actually get captured. And again, it's kind of cool because the few survivors are having to fly across the ocean and trying to eat on the move, but there's no water. And again, Novik actually makes like just surviving kind of interesting. I have found this book really boring the first time I read it, and it made kill my interest in the rest of the series. This time I found it a little bit more interesting, but I think by virtue of the fact that I wasn't actually expecting a lot from it, it was just kind of like, oh, this is kind of interesting, and I'm watering the plants out in the garden. And so they actually get captured by a French transport that's there. And this is actually kind of cool because the French are like, we're going to be gentlemanly because that's how we handle it. But also, we don't have enough food to get you to the Inca who are we are going to visit. So they strand them on an island, and the animosity between the crew and the aviators again keeps like reaching a boiling point more and more. And it's good tension, but it's also like not as I don't know. This is the Robin Caruso part of the trip, which I only got this time. That's kind of what she was doing, and like I'm just kind of like, but this is a side quest. Like, no,
yeah,
there's no real growth going on. Again, the problem is that there's no real character stuff going on, or even thematically in the book at this
yeah.
point.
And it would have been interesting if we would have had some of the crew, because the thing is, the this particular boat was crewed by sailors, but also sailors who were previously like
Convicts
no
in
good
Australia.
convicts. And so like all the good sailors, because there had been good sailors on the boat, died when the ship went down because they were trying to fix it, and then all the shitty people jumped off. Um, and so they basically have the worst of the worst, and basically the people that caused like they have been carting around like 200, 300 because Kulangila is with them and he a big boy. They've been carting around just like shitty people that cause, and like Lawrence lost his friend who things have gotten really complicated with um the whole 9 yards. But anyway, eventually the convicts and the sailors fuck around and find out, and they hurt Damane, who, and then Kulangile comes back and just like,
He
and
swipes
everybody's
his
like,
tail and knocks out like
and
30
and like
people.
rips, and not just that, because they cut away, like they don't say this,
Hmm.
but afterwards they have to clean up all the blood because he lit like he didn't eat anyone, but he
Fucked
raged.
up.
Kulangile was like, "You touched my cat," and the thing is, it's shocking, and everyone, the other dragons and the people, the humans who are left, are shocked because Kulangile is so chill. He's
He's like such a
he's
big kind of like,
he's such a
oh.
he's just a bro, like he just like as long as he's fed and Damone's safe, he's like he doesn't have like as much of a bloodlust as some of the other dragons. But when Damone was threatened, he like violently. Anyway, so they're on this island.
Well, okay,
Eventually,
and so the other thing that's interesting about this is afterwards he takes Damane to a island off the coast, and he
like a
won't
rock.
let him out of his sight for like 3 days. He won't let him leave the island. He's like, "No." And this is something that and it'll come up a little bit more in the book, but one thing that I would have liked at this point, and it comes to a little bit of a head where Damane is a little bit uncomfortable with how possessive Kulingile is of him and protective of him.
Damane is so independent. He wants to be able to fuck off and go do his own things. He
Yeah,
likes
he
to
likes
go
to hunt.
hunting. He likes to put himself in dangerous situations. And eventually he has to realize that you decided to get a dragon. You are now, you don't get to just be your own person now. You have to be a dragon's person. Just like Lawrence has to make decisions not to put himself like to duel and shit like that. With and eventually I think Damane through this just like, and again, you're right, it needed to be more explicit.
Because the thing about it is it's actually kind of a fascinating idea that Demane saw this chance to be someone instead of no one, because like he's black in England, like, you know what I mean? But if he has a fuck huge dragon, people can't fuck with him. And so like he made the spur of the moment, like, I'm gonna adopt this dragon. And then to like be changed to this massive creature is actually kind of fascinating, and to realize like, oh, maybe this wasn't the decision for me. Maybe the lifestyle, that's that's the fuck huge massive creature Maria is chained to.
It's
And so that's actually kind of fascinating, especially because Damani is an older brother. So there could be an aspect of like, oh, I kind of shouldn't have done this, or I'm actually very uncomfortable. Like, because it throughout the books, it's always treated as like, you got a cool magic dragon friend for life. This is awesome. But like, actually being in a long-term committed relationship is difficult, and especially if you're someone who like maybe had more independent instincts, and the book doesn't really do that. Like, that actually is never really brought up. It's literally just kind of treated as, oh, Damani needs to like do his duty and communicate more with Kulingile. And it's
yep.
like, that's kind of interesting, but not as interesting as it would have broadened the world more. I talked about how there's kind of a problem in these books where dragons aren't assholes. And so the book never really has to grapple with what does a 20-ton asshole like dragon actually like, how do we give dragons rights if there's one of them that's just 20 tons and can just kill and torch like London in a day? Like, and so like this would have been a place where it would have been interesting to broaden a little bit the idea of dragons as not just an unmitigated good. And it would have given some thematic weight to what's going on, and some interesting stuff. The other thing is that Damane has proposed to Roland like 3 times, and she keeps saying no because she knows they will be stationed on different dragons.
Because they
Which I kind
both
of,
have heavyweights
and she's actually really pissed that he had picked up Kulangile because she wanted him to be her like
on
second
her. Yeah,
lieutenant so
yeah.
that they could be like married and together. And she's like, there's not a point. And it's very funny because she's talking to Lawrence about this, who is just super uncomfortable about this girl speaking so frankly to him about this stuff. Um, Very funny. I did like, again, Novik is really good at fan fiction. And so she's really good at those like small domestic moments that me and Maria love in fan fiction, and like the character interactions that bounce off of each other. And so those are sprinkled throughout these books in a way that's really nice. But again, the broad strokes of the book, I think, are where the problems crop up.
And honestly, the best part of, because in a really quick summary, eventually they get off their little rocky island. They get to South America, but they're in the Incan territory, not where they wanted to be, which was up
Yeah, they're
by
like in
Porto.
Chile or
Yeah,
Peru.
they wanted to get to Brazil. They're in Peru,
Brazil.
basically.
Capoeira.
And
I watched the Bob's Burgers one time in one of the early episodes. They have a capoeira master, and he just says Brazil capoeira. And ever since that, I've never been able to get that out of my head. It's
good
random,
job.
guys. Welcome. You're
Um,
welcome for inflicting it on you.
but yeah, and in they accidentally, because Iskierka upset some Incan, like basically the terms of engagement, or just like being a civilized dragon or person.
So what happened is that, much like in the real world, disease went through and killed 90% of the population of all of the Native Americans and Inca and indigenous people. And so the Incan dragons, who used to be kind of in the African way, part of, they had they don't call it a kipu. What do they call it? Basically, it's like a clan or a tribe, or basically that's your group of humans and you are of that group of humans. But what happened is, when the disease went through 200 years ago, all of a sudden humans now are a really valuable currency, much more so than gold. And so like, the fact that they have 300 prisoners with them is viewed as like, oh my god, like what the hell? What are you doing? And like the dragons steal kill the humans from each other, but they're always careful to treat them very nicely and to have them breed, which is just a funny thing throughout the books. That from that point on is that they're always like, "Oh, you need to get your captain to have children. Like you should pick a fertile woman for him."
Yeah, and
Very funny.
it's so, because it shows you the cultural damage of, like, dragons were the minority and there was plenty of humans to go around, and then all of their because human dragons feel the loss of whatever they think is theirs very deeply. So for
Hmm.
a lot of these dragons, similar like the dragons in Africa who lost to slavery a lot of their people, and it like was very traumatic. The counter thing of this is now the dragons steal people and try like amass. You want a big group, you want a big family, you want extended family, big enough that if you have a child as a dragon, you can start your dragon child's IU. It's an IU. You can start your dragon child's IU by giving them some of your people to go ahead, but it's technically yours, and your dragon child is just under your, like, and it's just, and it's funny because Temeraire starts thinking of all the like
Yeah.
failures that are within his, because he's got like 100, and they're like, "Wow, you have a lot of people," and he was like, "I do. They should look nicer. I would like nicer shirts for them. These are my people I'd like to." And he starts like cultivating, and Lawrence is just sitting there watching this like, "Oh, this is not going to go well." And basically they try to talk, and Hammond is trying to make like interact with the Incan ruler to, because they know that France is trying to get in with him,
That's
and
what
he's
that
like,
one group was coming up to do. So they're
yeah,
talking to the Inca, the Sapa Inca, who
yeah.
is an empress.
And negotiations don't go well. Iskierka, the one Incan dragon who is one of the Sapa Inca's dragons, develops a thing for Iskierka, so she gets to like meet the Sapa Inca, and basically the Sapa Inca is looking for a new husband because she has multiple, but she's trying to add one in. Um,
It's a
and
Penelope situation, as they say, where it's like she doesn't want to piss off any of her suitors by picking
by
one, but she
picking,
needs them all. Yeah.
yeah, and so she needs a different unrelated emperor. And at first Iskierka, who has this entire book because she found out like Lawrence is a prince, and like he has gotten treated
I forgot
well
about this.
because he is a prince of China on a technicality. Um and she was like, "I shall make Granby a prince or an emperor." And so she sees her opportunity, and she offers Granby as a marriage option to the Sapa Inca. Um, Eventually, things go badly because
Oh, it's
Napoleon,
funny though because Granby's like, "Ah, Lawrence, I can't do it." And Lawrence is like, "You can, it's fine." He's like, "No, I'm gay." Like,
and
and
Lawrence
Lawrence
is
is
like,
like, because the thing is, it's funny. There's a point where he talks about how, like, in the Navy, like, there's a bunch of gay people, but he always just assumed it was because there weren't women around, and like, you
and he
can't
also just
legally,
ignored it. You
yeah,
pretend
you
you
just
don't see it.
because if you see it, you have to see something, say something, and then that's illegal. And then Granby's like, and he's like, well, couldn't you just? And he's like, yeah, I could get her a child, but like, I'm not gonna not fuck around going forward, like, which is very funny and different than Lawrence.
And he
Um,
also finds out that he's been one of the captains of
mhm.
another
Dyer, I think
dragon.
it is.
Yeah, no, Dihern is heroic as
No, I think there's a Dyer, but I'm probably wrong. I'm terrible with names.
oh, you might be now that you say Dyer. But anyway, one of them of their formation have been, and it's funny because this character knows, and there's a point where she very publicly is like, "Listen, you can still continue with this other captain," and everybody's like, "It's character, like, what are you doing?"
And his
But
dragon is like, you weren't supposed to say anything. It's a secret.
it's so funny. But anyway, Napoleon flies in and is like, "Hello, I'm here. I'd like to." And so the Sapa Inca decides to go with Napoleon. She wants to attack, and it's funny because the only reason they get a warning about this is because Temeraire has been kind of vaguely miffed that Iskierka has been spending so much time with this Incan dragon who was like, "Let's make an egg," because she's been ready, like she has an
She's a fire breather too, which is
unbreather.
super valuable.
She's been spending a lot of time with this other guy, and like Tamara does not like her, but he is like, well,
He
my
doesn't
egg
like
would
that
be
she's
better.
not. Yeah. He doesn't like that she's not paying attention to him.
And so then they end up being like, okay, well, he's like, I'll give you an egg. So they go off, they eat first, they even like half cook something for each other. They do the thing, and on their way back they see Incan dragons forming up for a fight. So they're able to get in, get their people, get out before it gets bad. But then they're being chased through the Amazon. It doesn't go well. Granby gets sick. They have to cut off Granby's arm. Iskierka's not happy that his arm got cut off. They end up getting to Brazil. which
Well,
is
also they pick
technically
up an Incan dragon. I forget what her name is, but
oh
she wants
Cherokee.
Cherokee, who like she wants Granby as her part of
No, no,
her.
Hammond.
Oh yes, it is Hammond, who hates flying, but she's like, oh, but he has many friends, and he has like she keeps asking about his family because then his family would become her part of her
IU.
IU, and it's just very funny. And she's like, no, my mom will understand. I'll send her some children. I'll send her some of her children, and she'll be happy with it later
Yeah,
because
it's
her
fine.
mom was a very chill
And so
dragon.
she
I'm
just
very
she
happy that they had reunited her with one of the old men from her.
so funny. But anyway, they end up getting to Brazil, which is a British ally, but is heavy in the slave trade. And Brazil is beset currently by the Swana dragons. And they end up getting to one of the really big cities that they were supposed to go to. And it is just smoke and chaos. And it's just giant Swana dragons living
Besieged,
there.
because what happens is the Swana keep trying to find their family members, the slaves, but like a lot of them aren't alive anymore, and so the Brazilians have also realized, like, look, if we corral them all in one spot, we can threaten them and use them as hostages, essentially. So it's kind of like a stalemate. The Swana have the upper hand militarily, but they can't really do anything about it. And so Lawrence shows up and is like, "Yeah, we're not going to fight the Swana." Like at this point, he's like, "No, we're not
Because
going
he's
to."
very anti-slavery, and he's like, no, stop your slavery, give them back their people. And what they also realize is that the Swan are not being picky. If you said you had an uncle who might have matched the description of one of their people, they're just like, congratulations, you're part of our tribe
One of
now.
one of the most touching parts we talked about in book 4 is when, one of the dragons, he was so happy when he learned that, one of the people from his tribe had children, and he hadn't known, and he went to see them, and he was flying across the sky. Like, it was I forget what her name is in that book, but it was, like, one of the most touching moments. So they view themselves as like, "Oh, if you have ancestors, that's fine too. We'll be chill with
Descendants,
that."
descendants.
Yeah, descendants. And then basically what happens is that they basically decide, like, the Swana are like, again, it's very
We'll
perfunctory how
negotiate.
we'll negotiate, but it's very perfunctory how this comes about. And basically, they're like, "Well, actually, why don't we just hang out here and we'll become part of Brasilia or Brazil, and like we'll just we'll take care of our people and become part of Brazil if you like emancipate them all." I think is
Yeah, so
essentially what
because some of
happens.
the dragons want to go back, but one of the things Lawrence realizes is there's not enough transports to get everybody back in a
Hmm.
timely enough manner, and it would give Brazil the chance to change their mind. So they're just like he ends up just being like, "Well, why don't you guys stay here?" And they're like, "We will stay here," and they end up uh, bargaining slash negotiating with the Brazilian government, who is Portuguese, you know.
By the way, this is actually an interesting parallel to real life because probably the largest exchange, we tend to think of colonialism in the New World as being an exchange of European and native cultures, but actually the largest influx of population was from Africa to Brazil in a lot of ways. And so the Columbian exchange, as they call it, actually happened a lot between Brazil and Africa. And also because they're on similar climates. It's kind of like how there's hippos in Colombia, and they actually cause problems because there's like 4 or 5 left over from Escobar. And they actually live in it's the similar equator. They can actually, the family lives the same way. And in Brasilia, you actually still see this to an extent where you had entire colonies that were slaves and natives who basically were just like, yeah, we're going to go do our thing outside of there. And it causes land rights now in that they've always lived on this land, but technically they were kind of unincorporated in a way because they weren't totally legal. It's actually a very interesting thing. And so this is kind of an interesting parallel to that. But it just happens. Like
Yeah,
there's
like
not.
Portugal slash Brazil decides to agree to their terms, and then they just and then because they're like, how are we going to get some of these people back? And then there's some French transports, and so they have to steal the French transports, and there's a battle. And basically, at the end of that book, after the battle, and they fix everything, uh, Gong Su, who has been what they thought just one of the chefs for Temeraire from China, is like, actually, I'm a diplomat for Prince Yongxing, your esteemed imperial brother, elder brother, even though Yongxing is younger than
Mhm.
Lawrence. But anyway, and he would like you. He sees all the shit that's happening in Europe and how Napoleon's getting real big of a threat, and he's attacked Russia, which is really close to China, and he would like to talk to you about stuff. And they're like, for diplomatics, maybe we can finally get China on our side. So they're like, we're gonna go, and but Lawrence is like, Gong Su, you were a spy this whole time, and you weren't just a chef, and
I
man,
always
man.
I was always curious if she had planned this from the beginning or not, because there's a part in the second or the third book where they're leaving where Gongsu throws a rock at a wall that if the rock bounces or something like that, you're supposed to stay home, and one of the other chefs had to go home after that. So I always wondered when she if this was a thing she planned all along or if it came about. But I just do like that, like this whole time he's been around and you think he's just the grumpy Chinese chef, and then it's like no, it's like a very anime like no, I was a really smart guy but playing the fool the whole time
The whole time, because then from this point on, he can't take the guise of a chef anymore. So like he has to take on the role of a
of a
diplomat
diplomat.
slash. Anyway, so that's where that book ends. The next book, they're on the way to China, and then oh no, there was a really bad storm, and they lost Lawrence. Lawrence is washed up on the
Shipwrecked.
shore of
Everybody thinks he's dead,
yeah,
but
he's
actually
washed up
he's
on
in
the
Japan.
yeah, and he don't got no memory, and he gets found by this Japanese lord, who had made a deal with the gods, basically saying the next traveler I find, I will help them on their way in their journey and take care of them. And it's Lawrence, and it's not that's not good because Lawrence is British and European, and there's supposed to be no Europeans in this part of Japan. So like some people want to like arrest him, but this guy has also said he's going to take care of him, and this guy has one of his vassals is this guy named Junichiro, who's this young dude. And basically, to help his master, Junichiro helps Lawrence escape.
This whole time, Lawrence has amnesia, so he doesn't quite know why he's there, why he has a Chinese sword.
The last thing he remembers is right before he found Temeraire's egg. So he don't remember Temmie. He don't remember becoming part of the aerial corps. At one point, he sees his jacket and it's aviator green, and he's like, I wonder if they just found a jacket next to me and they were like, this yours now. Um, and but he knows he knows that his that Chinese sword that Temeraire gave him is his, and so there's things that he sort of knows, but he doesn't have much of a memory. So they're going to try to get him to the port city where people are. Meanwhile, Temeraire's like, I need to go find Lawrence, and everybody's like, no, you can't just fly into Japan.
Eventually, they do those so they can get some like wood for their ship. And so the deal with the dragons in Japan is that they're basically treated the same way the Chinese ones are, in that they're just like people in the government.
No, they're like automatic aristocracy. There's no more dragons. The
Oh, okay,
China
that's
is
true. It's
capitalism.
capitalist. Yeah, I forgot. You're right.
It's
And
this.
there's two specific breeds that are cool. There's one that again is I think we mentioned it before. This fuck huge ocean dragon that can
No, they're
just
the same one. She makes the point.
oh
Kiyu makes the point that one day she will go into the ocean and she'll
oh I
grow
thought
that
she was a
big.
specifically river one.
No, 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 no. They all start small, and then if they go into the
Okay.
ocean, they're literally like a goldfish. They grow to their bowl.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, so he can just spit water, which sounds like a dumb thing, but actually is super cool. Like he grounds like six dragons by hitting
He
them with
can make
water.
tsunamis. Check
Essentially,
him
yeah.
out.
Very cool, and he's kind of the protector of the like
And he's
west
the
and
biggest dragon we have ever seen. Ever.
yeah.
There's no dragon that is bigger than this guy. He can't fly, but he's bigger because we've seen sea serpents that are massive, and this guy is bigger than that. Like we're talking, I think they said 60 like tons, like just and like the biggest dragon we've seen so far is like 27 tons.
Yeah.
Like just an absolute fucking monster. Huge, huge, huge. Um,
And then
but
we meet a
they're
smaller version, which is a river one when Temeraire and or not Temeraire, when Lawrence and Junichiro run away. And she's really cool because she likes to drink and she likes poetry and she's like very she
and
can kind of do her
stories.
own thing. So she keeps having Lawrence recite Shakespeare to her, and she really likes that. She's like, I'm gonna travel with you for a while and you'll tell me about your Shakespeare person, one
And I'll
person
take
important.
you on your way to where you'd like to go. And like the Japanese, because they end up passing a settlement, and they're like and she's like, why, of course I would take them. And it's like she's above the law, she doesn't have to concern herself with these things.
Hmm.
um she can choose to, because there are dragons in Japan that fly. We meet one of them in the household of the person Lawrence originally goes to, but the river dragons are like extra special, and they're considered lords or ladies. But anyway,
And then actually really quickly, that dragon that we do meet that's part of the aristocracy, it's cool because the dragons are not supposed to bond with the feudal lords under them because that's like, they don't want favoritism, but she seems to really like the lord that took in Lawrence. And it's really cute. I don't know why, but I totally ship them together because
I
it's like
know it's so
um
cute.
that being said, I don't know why Novik didn't go this way, but it should have been that only samurai get dragons, and the dragon, much in the same way that the katana is thought of as the warrior spirit, the dragon would have been thought of as the warrior spirit of the samurai, and then the samurai, and they would have been like midweight dragons, and the samurai could have had those fuck huge bows they have, where they could hit like a fly with it from like 50 feet away, and they would have just sniped other dragons in the air. That would have been so fucking cool, but they didn't do it for some reason.
I like it as it is. I do. I much prefer samurai. It's funny whenever you talk to Japanese people, the samurai are such a small part of their history and culture. Like they were only there for like 200 years. They literally, it's like we are as the West are fascinated by this thing, and they're just like it was just a period. It was just the soldiers of the day. Like they don't think it's as cool, and so I like the idea of these being more intellectual, like
No, I think you keep the river dragon and the water dragon, but then the rest of the dragons are like
samurai dragons.
samurai dragons. So I'm going to talk about this later, but there's a problem where Novik, and this goes back to kind of the coddling we talked about and infantilization of the first books, where like none of the non-European countries are allowed to have bad dragons or bad systems for their dragons. So actually it would have been kind of cool if like the emperor of Japan was a dragon and he was like not a great guy, he was like a tyrant or something like that. That would have been kind of an interesting idea, but she's just not allowed to do that because non-white people have to have good relationships with their dragons because they're morally superior. But anyway,
Will is from his family hails from South America. Let's just can I just throw that out there? He like really quick. I just feel like I need to contextualize for a second.
we're not going to go through the whole thing, but we talked last time about how there's kind of a objectification, infantilization to saying people of color are always good, and that kind of was very much a thing in these cultures, in these books, because again, the dragons are sort of seen as externalization of the inherent morality of the culture, and so
Yeah.
because these non-white cultures have better dragons, it's because they're morally superior. Again, this is kind of a very complicated topic and has to do with social justice movements, but it's complicated, so just go watch the last episode if you're interested
Yes,
in that.
we go into much more detail there. Basically, there's a bit of tension. Eventually, they find Lawrence. Lawrence is like, I don't know, I have it because like Lawrence is doing like he sees a British ship and he's doing like code to get taken. Temeraire comes a running and like fucks shit up and is like, get away from my captain. And Lawrence is like, yo, captain. And basically he meets like he meets everyone and everyone's like, oh, Lawrence lost his memory. Temeraire is having a really hard time understanding this. The one doctor on board is like, don't tell him too much. It will fuck with his brain. It'll be no good. And so basically, most of this book, he has uh, just no memory of what's happening. But because he is good soldier and he only remembers being good soldier, he tries his damnedest. He's like, tell me all the names of my crew. What are the formations? What do I need to be doing? And he's trying really hard to act in the way he should. And it's funny because he remembers how to speak Chinese. He also remembers a weird amount of the rituals for the Chinese, like
Mm-hmm.
interacting with the prince and everything. But anyway, they get to China, and basically in China, they are almost immediately attacked. Basically, the Chinese
Two
are
factions.
split. There's two factions. No Europeans. Europeans and Prince Yongxing is team. We need to partner with the Europeans to deal with, to learn things and to deal with Napoleon, and other groups don't want to for very valid reasons. One is Britain keeps bringing in opium, even though we keep telling them not to, and the British government is not doing what they need to. Because, like, there is a moment where Hammond's like, "Well, I don't know, what are we?" And basically, it's the thing we get is that the British government is turning a blind eye. They've agreed not to send in the
This is
opium,
a
so
real
it's
thing
not.
in the real world, by the way. This is
Yes.
like a real historical.
And so they know it's going in, but it's not coming in through official channels, but they're letting it happen because it's basically the thing that they get the most money from in there, like, because the Chinese goods are of such superior value that unless they're giving them something that like is easy for them, and opium is easy for them, they'd be paying a butt ton of money. But anyway, so like valid concerns, like we're partnering with this nation and they keep sending in this drug that is addicting and poisoning our people. So valid concerns, but they're being dicks. They tried to murder their crown prince. They also take Lawrence on accident, which really upsets Temeraire. Also, the crown prince's dragon died. His imperial dragon,
So he's thought
no,
to have
his
lost the
celestial.
mandate of heaven, which is like,
Yeah.
oh.
And so basically, they end up rescuing them. Temeraire finds them, and they're like, okay, well, Iskierka has a dragon egg, and you can use that as your celestial egg if you would like to. Because Temeraire tries having like relations with another dragon named, I think her name is May. Yeah,
I
May.
loved her. She's so nice.
I
She's
loved
kind of like
her too,
soft.
and it's not working too much. But then they disagreements. They meet with the emperor. The emperor's like, "You guys go put down that rebellion that's happening in southern China, and we'll go from there." And when they go to put down the rebellion, what they discover is that it's a fake rebellion. The people who are working against the crown prince are making it look like the
British are smuggling in the opium, but really it's a false flag operation.
I mean, it is the British. Like it is
Well,
coming in from
yes.
the British, but they're specifically helping fly it in to make
Hmm.
it worse. But they also like make it look like that the commoners are rebelling, but they're not. There is no rebellion happening, which also meant they killed an entire city or town. And I didn't like this because I do think the argument against allying with the British because of this is very valid, and I felt
Hmm.
like it made the Chinese dissenting side too much of mustache twirling villains for them to go this route, because you
Yeah.
should be much more sympathetic to them. But once you find out that they killed an entire village to make it look like it was the rebels who were being funded by the British to get more opium in, you're like, ah, you're making yourself so much the villain that I am on the side of the people who technically know that the opium, and like Lawrence doesn't know. There's one point where Lawrence is like, I can assure you, Emperor, it's not happening. And then Hammond's like, actually, we know it's happening and we're not stopping it, but it's technically not through official mediums. And Lawrence is like, God damn you, Hammond.
And because he's lost his memory, he's like, "Oh my god, the government could do something wrong. What do I do if the government
Do
did something wrong as my duty?" And so basically, with his amnesia, he's having to go through all the steps he did in the first 5 books of like, "I have a dragon. I like the dragon. The dragon has we have to be together. Wait a second, the British government isn't great. What if they did this?" Because he also doesn't know about his betrayal of them. And then Temeraire mentions it by accident because he's like, "Ah, we live in Australia." And again, the thing that Temeraire is most worried that he's going to be mad about is losing his 10,000 pound treasures, which is just
when it's really just that, oh my God, I committed treason. That's like the worst part of it.
And basically, the problem with the amnesia is that it's a total closed circuit. It doesn't inform Lawrence's character afterward. He doesn't change from having had amnesia. He's just the same guy that he basically just went through all the steps. And I think she did this because there's nothing else happening in the book in terms of the characters. Like there really isn't anything else happening. And so it's kind of a cul-de-sac that's not interesting. There is some interesting stuff, or could be interesting in terms of like Temeraire is beginning to think about Lawrence's mortality a little bit, and like he keeps getting told like, "Oh, Lawrence needs a concubine," and so at one point he's like, "Okay, but if he has a wife, he's gonna go away from me, so I need to get him a concubine." And the Incan dragon is like, "Of course, like it's actually been very negligent of you to make sure he doesn't have any children. What's going to happen when he dies? You need to think ahead." Um, Interesting, but it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, partially because Temeraire like doesn't want Lawrence's kid. Like he wants Lawrence, but Temeraire is also independent enough, and this is something that comes up in the next book. Lawrence is independent enough that, or no, Temeraire is independent enough that if Lawrence dies, he's just going to continue doing what he wants to do. He's going to be super super sad about it and kind of depressed. Um, but he's not one of those where like he's just going to go to their breeding ground and not be able to help in the war or anything like that. He still has his goals and things that he wants to do. It's very interesting because there's literally a whole point where Temeraire and Lawrence with amnesia have like a
A
discussion that
fight.
they neither a fight because Temeraire thinks he likes the woman that they hired to take care of Emily and be her chaperone. Um, and he's like, no, I had no thoughts of being like with her. And then Temeraire's like, but do you want to be with anyone? And it's just this interesting thing that happens. But basically, they defeat the like opposing Chinese faction. They go back. China's like, we will give you 500 dragons to go fight Napoleon.
Right. And the thing is, the Chinese dragons are like much better at military stuff than everybody else. They fly informations. The big thing, and this is a thing in book 5, is that feeding a lot of dragons is a problem. Like the Chinese, they help reinforce Russia after this. That's what happens is they fly with Temeraire to Russia, and they're like, we actually can't gather our forces because there's not enough. Like we can
Food.
gather all of the dragons together for like a month or two, but that's it. After that, we got to get back to China, and you need to make sure not to muster us before you have a chance to do it. And that's kind
And
of
they're
like
also moving very slowly. It's number one to not give away the element of surprise, but also so that they can feed each group smaller group easier. Like, and
Hmm.
it's just like this later half of this book is called the lesson of logistics, basically.
Yeah. Because remember,
uh,
also Russia has their fuck horrible winters, and so they get there. Napoleon is attacking Russia. Napoleon again is such a great character in these books.
so
He's
great.
both brilliant and also like affable, and like, but also not a great guy in terms of what he's doing to the world. And we get to see another nation now because Russians are white or considered white anyway, of people treating dragons badly. And in this world, and with Russia, basically you have like a few heavyweights, and those heavyweights are basically bribed with gold, and they bully all the smaller dragons to do what they want. The smaller dragons never get fed enough. They don't really do any of the fighting, but the Russian heavyweights are so huge that they can do it. They like, but also they don't care. At one point, like they see treasure and they streak through the sky and actually, or like they drop a bunch of troops by like because they just weren't paying
Yeah,
attention to what
they
was
don't care
going on.
about their captains.
Right.
They're not bonded to their captains. It is very like, and they the way the Russians captain control them is sometimes literally through a bit in their mouth and a bridle. So it's not the like kumbaya symbiotic relationship you get in other places. It is very much just like these are wild bombs that we control.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's so cool. I really liked that. I really liked the kind of harkening back to dragons as like horde, controlling, caring about their horde, and being a
mhm.
little bit evil. The only dragons they have that are like actually useful besides the heavyweight are the Cossacks, who like their dragons because they're coded as non-white. Again, it's kind of an irritating thing about the books. But and then the other thing is that the Russian dragon ferals in the breeding camps are hobbled so that they can't fly without like spikes
Yeah,
hitting them.
any dragon in the breeding grounds has giant like in their wings they've got
It's
like
like a barb.
a barb inside them so they can't flap and they can't get off the ground. And so because there's this one point where the little tiny ferals they're like, why don't you just go hang out in the breeding grounds? Like, why are you putting yourself through this? You're not getting enough food. People are dicks to you. And the one guy's like, nobody would choose to be in the breeding grounds, and it's because they can't fly, and flying is so important to dragons. So a lot of the small dragons choose rather to do this grunt work, and maybe they'll get enough food than not being able to fly. And it's really cruel. And but it is like, and one of the things that they talk about is that a huge problem in Russia during other periods when there was dragons and there was not enough food because of how bad the winters were, the dragons would eat humans, which is not something, and it's something that you hear about like old England back in like the
Hmm.
Arthurian times, like dragons eating humans, but it's not been a problem for a very long time. um, and so here it's this culture that has a much greater fear of dragons, more so than some of the other places, and so they are just incredibly cruel and not understanding, and like they don't see their dragons as like smart. um and they basically, it's military fiction time.
Oh,
We're
it's so
having
fun.
battles. It's really good, and the logistics of like, how do we get enough food, how do we do this, and then eventually the French decide to start liberating, which Lawrence has already been thinking about and trying to work on.
So what happens is the retreat from Moscow, the infamous one with the Russian winter with Napoleon, that happens, but with dragons. And the thing about it is that Napoleon goes to the breeding grounds and he releases all of these dragons. And the thing is, the dragons at this point are starving because there just is not enough food, and the breeding ground dragons have not gotten enough. So they just swamp the British or the Russian
Yeah,
supply
because
lines.
he basically just tells them like that direction for
Hmm.
food, and so they just fuck up the British and Russian supply lines.
And not
And the
only
Chinese.
that, the wounded, they start eating them. And it's like, "Oh, this is cool," and the Chinese dragons are, like, stunned because 'cause they've never seen dragons do this before.
That is never that's not part of their cultural history at all. And like
Yeah.
Temeraire is like, humans? Like it's like watching like hearing about cannibalism.
Yeah, so it's really cool. I really liked that portion of the book. Nothing happens character-wise, but that's to be
No.
expected at this point.
They end up defeating Napoleon. He makes a bad choice as far. I like the Russian general. I thought
Oh,
he
yeah,
was
the old guy?
Tukuzov. I liked his like plan, like the way he like strategized and everything, and how people like second guessed him. And I also liked that it was a successful version of what the it was successful because it was intentional. They basically won through tiring out the
They
French
basically just
forces
waited, and the French,
and
like, had
ran.
to, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, eventually had to
which
retreat.
which is kind of the opposite, but also the same thing that happened with the not the Polish,
The
the
Prussians.
Austrian, the Prussians in the I think the third book, Black Powder War.
Mm-hmm.
And because they were just they kept retreating, but it was unplanned, it was not intentional, and there was no grand like thing, but they also had a better idea of how like the French would be. It's just really like from a military fiction point
Oh,
very
I love it
interesting.
so much. I don't understand why this whole channel isn't just military fiction. Instead, we read so many girl books for girls.
You pick the
I know
books,
that's the funny thing is I do
you
pick the majority.
brag.
I know, but there's not that much good military fiction. A lot of it is just like dudes being dudes, and I'm like, I don't really
Oh,
want to read
I
that.
can't help you. I don't know how.
I
I don't know how to give
know,
you what you want, William.
but I want like military fiction fanfic and mixed with fanfic. That's what I really want.
You just
Hilariously,
want Novik to write military fiction.
as again, the moral of this channel is why do we let people who aren't Novik write? And so basically they capture Marat, who is Napoleon's brother, and then basically the book ends with like Napoleon is retreating into the east. And book 9, the last book, League of Dragons, starts with them trying to capture Napoleon as he's fleeing back across
Russia, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Russia, and like they think they've got him in the battle, and then they don't.
And so then they have to go.
But Temeraire does get a treasure. He captures a
Oh
bunch of treasure,
yeah, a
so
wagon
he's in
filled
funds
with
again.
treasure. And he's like, Lawrence, I'm giving you back yours, and I also have enough for myself. And he ends up contacting some of the Russian pharaohs to be like, yo, have you seen, because they Captain Diehern has been with them. He was one of the Prussian captains that they worked with, but who lost Heroica in the that one really bad battle that ended the Prussian French
War.
war. Um, Jena. It was the Battle of Jena. Anyway, and they have Diehern, and he's like, Temeraire's like, I wonder if any of the Prussian dragons are around. And he basically goes to some of the pharaohs, and he's like, if you get any information about a dragon called Heroica or any other Prussian dragons, I will give you my gold plates. And he doesn't want to. He hates it.
The
Even at the
amount
end of
that
the book,
he hates it. He doesn't even like thinking about having to give it away. And
yeah,
he's
and
like,
there's
he wants Lawrence to know it's a huge sacrifice on his
and
part.
Lawrence is like, listen, if we can get the heavyweights, it'll be cheap at the price. And Tamara's like, sure,
No.
okay. And it's so
It
funny.
never gets old.
It doesn't. There's this point where Lawrence and this one guy get into a fight about something. Like, one of the Russian guys says something. So, like, Napoleon leaves Russia, yay! But Russia is also like, we might have to tango with him again. And Lawrence is like, we're gonna have to tango with him again. But then they're having a party, and Lawrence keeps getting taken out to be the like Prince of China,
Mhm.
and he has to wear his robes, and he doesn't love it. But then one person is saying shit about the Emperor of China, who is now Lawrence's brother at this point, because the previous emperor died, and Prince Yonsheng is now Emperor Yonsheng. And so Lawrence has to like punch him, because it's like, you can't just insult like in front of me, like, my guy, you can't. And so then there's a duel, and like Turkey and Temeraire get at it, because Hammond goes to be Lawrence's second, and ends up like what you think killing the guy, because like the dude that they're fighting accidentally shoots before the count of 3, and Hammond's like, no, buddy, I got this, which is great
It's
compared to
great.
Hammond, who had never held a gun when we first saw him. But anyway, there's a convalescent period because Lawrence did get shot, and during the convalescent period, there's this whole side thing about Miss Mercalite and who the fuck's gonna marry her, because Turkey's like, Hammond marry her, and Temeraire's like, well, Lawrence can't marry her, but there's no reason I can't have her in my crew. Any one of my crew, you should marry her.
She's a young peasant maiden who's taken care of in the house where they're getting taken care of, and her mother's like, "Oh, okay, this is a good marriage." Like, she's not like, "Oh no, let's keep him away." She's like, "This is a good price for her," and like, and the girl likes Ferris, but Ferris is like from a noble family, and he doesn't want to get them more. And then the dragons keep being like, because again, Turkey wants like more for her Ayu, and then Temeraire wants it for his, and it's. I thought it was funny and charming,
It
but
just lasts too long.
yeah, it does last too long. And again, Diern is eventually the one who gets her. He's the
And
older Prussian guy.
because what ends up happening is, while they're in there and this whole like drama is happening, because at first Ahern is not involved at all, but then like one day, like some of the pharaohs pop by, and they're like, Temeraire, why aren't you where you said you'd be? Like, how are we supposed to get you a message? And he was like, well, do you have any information? And they were like, give us the gold. And he's like, I said I'd give you gold if you had information. And then all of a sudden, I'm gonna say it how it unfolds in the scene, because all of a sudden, you hear Dihern gasp and like cry out, and then he starts running towards Heroica, flying down, and like all the Prussian, like 40 Prussian dragons just appear, and it's so sweet because Dihern's so happy to have Heroica back, and you're just like, I literally listened to this scene 3 times
It's
because
so
I was
cute.
just, it's so flippin' cute.
And Hiroka keeps trying to like nudge him like a cat, but also not crush him at the same
Yeah, it's
time.
like
He's trying to
Dihern
show
keeps getting
affection.
toppled, and so then Heroica, who's picking up from Turkey and Temeraire that you want a bigger group of people, is very happy that Dihern marries Miss Mercalite, who then becomes Mrs. Dihern, and because she's so pretty, like that's the other reason why everybody wants her, because
Hmm.
she's very pretty, and it's like, here's a shiny bauble to add to my thing, and Heroica's like very happy about it. But they also tell Temeraire that they heard what's the white dragon's name?
Lian.
When they were in the French places, they heard Liane talking about Temeraire and Iskirka's dragon, and how it's an abomination and it's a crossbreed and it cannot be the Emperor of China's dragon, and she's gonna put an end to it. And Temeraire's like, oh my god, she's going for my egg. And so he's like, I must go. Lawrence is still injured and cannot fly, and so Hammond is like, Temeraire, if you take Lawrence, he will die. And Temeraire's, you're like, you're right. So he goes to Heroica and he's like, protect Lawrence for me. I must go. And Lawrence is like Temeraire leaves, and Lawrence,
Well, no, no, no. First, Hiroka has such a bro moment with him. Where he's like, "You ever turn the dearest thing to me? I will watch him like my own." I really like that Hiroka and him are
it's
then like
so
bros
cute. It's
afterwards.
so, because at first they did not get along, so it's such a
No.
nice. But anyway, Temeraire flies off. Everybody else goes back.
Well, this
Lawrence is
should
like,
also be a bigger character moment for Temeraire that he's leaving Lawrence behind for the egg. Like it should be either, it should be a growth on his part that he's willing, that he's able to leave Lawrence behind, but it isn't like it's not really treated as a
it should be
character
an
arc thing.
independence moment. Like his, like he doesn't need, he can trust that he's going to come back and that Lawrence will love him.
Yes.
And, he doesn't have to worry about this upsetting, but he also has to go do this thing for himself. Like, I honestly would have preferred if him and Lawrence had the conversation where Lawrence said, like, my dear, I unfortunately, I want, or if he says to Lawrence, like, I can't have you come with me, it will hurt you. And Lawrence is like, no, 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 I'll come, this is important to you. And then them come to the point of view that, like, no, we love each other, we will come back to each other, but
Trust.
like we trust each other to be apart from each other. That would have been a great moment. Unfortunately, he doesn't have that conversation. He doesn't talk to Lawrence before he leaves. He just leaves. So he leaves and ends up getting traumatized, because like there's not a lot of places to sleep. It's Russia, it's winter, and all the ferals that Napoleon have let loose have just been fucking shit up, including just eating
People.
people. And so the people have been trying to combat this, so they make dragon traps, which is they make like a half abandoned barn missing a wall, and dragons will go in and like sleep under it, and then while the dragon's sleeping, they just throw firewood on top and boulders. How did they get the boulders up there? Anyway, the
Yeah.
giant rocks. And then burn them. So Temeraire wakes up and like smells smoke, and he's got like coals falling on his back, and he's freaking out, and it takes a lot to be able to get out, but it hurts his throat. He gets holes in his wings through where the rocks fell through, and he's like going to China, and then he ends up finding Tharke, and Tharke is like, no, 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 no. They already have the egg. We got to get them through the Alps. So then they start going that way.
Which is like a weird, like, why did he leave Lawrence if it wasn't a character moment and he was just gonna come back and get
Come back
Lawrence
immediately,
in a
like
chapter
it's
later?
2 chapters later. He's back together with Lawrence. Anyway, but he now has a fear of fire that comes up once and never again. So they get Lawrence. They all decide to with
Basically, they find Iskierka and then they get
who's
trapped
also
by.
looking for the eggs.
Who's also like
Egg.
pissed off too that Temeraire lost it. Basically, it was a trap. Leanne catches them. She was never gonna destroy the egg anyway because like she's not a
No
barbarian.
dragons
Leanne should
or
have been
egg.
in more of this book. Like she's such an effective
Yes,
antagonist, but she's on screen so little. It's like a
yes.
weird thing. I would have liked to see her a lot more. And then Napoleon is happy to see Lawrence. But basically, what he's done is he's gathered dragons from all around the world to create the UN of dragons, and they're going to divide up the world based off of the feral dragons in the area. So, like Britain is going to become a Yellow Reaper ground, and then the Scottish, which apparently have a bunch of ferals, will get Scotland, and like Lawrence, and basically he's brought Lawrence to be like, see guys, I gave you the cure to the disease, and the guy who did it is standing right next to me.
Yeah, and that's how he's doing this, is he is bargaining with all these other nations by offering them the cure, but if they join the accord, which is like such a dick move when Lawrence was literally like, here, take it. like,
Mm-hmm.
and just gave it freely. And like, frankly, any of these nations could have just gone to Lawrence and been like, "Yo, can we get some of the cure?" And Lawrence would have been like, "I got you, bro. Like, for free. Don't worry. You
Yeah.
don't have to do fucking nothing." But yeah, it's a good image thing to have Lawrence with him, walking the grounds with him during these accords.
One thing I did like is that throughout the books, there's kind of been a tension of like, why is what Napoleon is doing bad exactly? Like the British have conquered places, everyone's conquered, Prussia conquered places. Why is it that Napoleon conquering places is bad? And in this book, like especially with the retreat from Moscow, it's like a oh there is such a waste to this war, and Napoleon will just try to do it again. Like we need this war itself is a problem, and like now this new thing is going to cause even more strife because the dragons are all going to be rising up against the humans. And like he doesn't, as much as he talks about dragon rights and actually gives them rights, does he care about the lives it's going to cost them? And I
Yeah.
thought that was sort of like a clever way of going around it.
Or the human lives that it's going to affect. Like, what chaos are you going to cause? Because basically all it's going to do is the dragons in the individual places will fight Napoleon's war for him, and they will get their own treaty. But then eventually Napoleon's going to come in and be like, "It's mine, bitch," which is the implication.
Oh, also Napoleon, Leanne has started a breeding program, and like in a couple months he's going to have like 500
Or
dragons.
no,
5,000.
4,000.
Yeah, like a crazy amount,
4,000.
and they're like, "How is he gonna feed them all?" And you get the idea that, like, a lot of them he expects a lot of them to die because they can't survive off of the food around it. Again,
Yeah.
logistics with dragons is important.
And so eventually they escape. They go. Iskierka and Temeraire have to make a decision where they're going to abandon Lawrence and Granby again. If Temeraire's conversation with if Temeraire leaving Lawrence earlier had happened the way we just described it, where they have a conversation, they talk about mutual trust, then Temeraire and Iskierka, when he's like, "We need to just rescue the egg. They're not gonna kill Lawrence and Granby. They're gonna be fine. We'll come get them later, but we have to rescue the egg." He could have had the same conversation with Iskierka, like, Granby loves you. He's not gonna, like, if you leave him, it's not like we know they're gonna be safe. You're
Or
just
it
gonna
could
have to
even been
trust
a
them.
contrast where Skerka has not reached that point and Temeraire realizes that he has,
Yep.
Also, for the first time in book 9, we finally get to meet like a Bengal tiger like dragon. Like and you're like, "Oh, this is where the India," and they fucking hate the British. They try to kill Lawrence on sight and they go
On
crazy.
site.
And
On
you're like,
site.
"Okay, so this whole time, cuz like this whole time me and Maria were like, what is going on with India? Did India not have
Not
dragons?
have,
How did
yeah, because like they never mention, like, India's mentioned as like a place where you can stop off for stuff, like, but you
Mhm.
never hear about what's happening in India.
Again, it doesn't really make sense that the country with the worst dragons conquered a lot of the world. It just fundamentally doesn't.
Especially within what Novik has told us about the world and how dragons keep
Yeah.
place. Like Britain in this universe should not be a superpower. It should be
No.
just a nation country that has built diplomatic bonds
I
and
think a
not.
North Korea situation would be fascinating where like they think they're great, but they're not. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and that could have been an interesting thing to explore in the world that they're just a small little island. They escape, they get to England, Lawrence gets laid, and then he becomes an admiral because like the Russian prince really liked him. So he's like, I want you to be my emissary, and all the British are like, harumph. Oh, also his father died in bed because he never really quite recovered from the shock of
Lawrence
Lawrence's
committing suicide.
betrayal. This should be more of like I mean, Lawrence thinks about it a little bit, but it doesn't form a cohesive arc, and it should with Temeraire because Temeraire is like, how did he die in his bed? Like he doesn't really get
Yes,
that you
and
can just die of infirmity.
you realize that because he Temeraire knows you can die if you're sick, and Temeraire knows you can die in battle, but he has no idea that humans will just die if left to their own devices for long enough.
Hmm.
And you think this is going to be the moment he thinks about that, and he actually starts thinking about the future post Lawrence, and it doesn't happen because he keeps going. And like after he finds out his father died in his bed, he keeps asking Lawrence, like, "Are you okay? Are you healthy? Are you okay? Like, are you sick? Is there anything wrong?" Also, because Lawrence is doing the whole like fight with that one guy, and Temeraire thinks something's wrong.
Oh, you mean the other tension thing where a bunch of the British aviators who came along with Lawrence's force are not trusting of him and they start to mutiny, but then nothing actually happens with it?
Yep,
Another moment where she builds the tension really beautifully and organically and then nothing comes of it. Yeah,
yep.
that happens. Also, the other big thing is that the Ferals in England have heard of the accord that Napoleon wants and is like, we want to do that. But Persietia
Poseidon.
Pasardia has become like one of the senators and
Yeah,
whatever England
she's part
does.
of Parliament.
Yes,
Like,
that's the
she has
one.
a seat in Parliament.
And she, like, makes the point that, like, "No, no, no, you don't want a tyrant to, he may offer liberty now, but what will the next tyrant say? It's much better."
Rather fight for our wins law by law through a like an ingrained legal system that
Mhm.
is much harder to overthrow than just one guy being like, I changed my mind, and now everybody has to listen to him. And it's really fascinating because you see the ways in which Poseidon has made a lot of progress since Temeraire has
Mhm.
been gone, but how much more needs to happen. And I'm really like, again, that is, I find that it's almost for me more fascinating than some of the war stuff.
Mhm. No, I
Because
agree.
it's so interesting, and so Temeraire and Poseidon have to try convince all the pharaohs, and so Temeraire throws a dinner. Meanwhile, Lawrence is trying to throw a dinner to get all his people on his side. And basically, they end up during the dinner. Temeraire throws for all the dragons because the pharaohs are like, "Well, what are you guys going to offer?" And because Temeraire is like, "Listen, Britain isn't perfect. I don't worry. I know that. I've
Mhm.
literally fought for that, but that doesn't mean we align ourselves with a tyrant for all the reasons previously stated." And so they were like, well, how are you going to make it better? So they sit down and they write like the Dragon Rights Act of whatever the
Yeah.
year is. And Tamara is so nervous because he thinks Lawrence is going to be pissed off because everyone is pissed off at Lawrence because his dragon keeps causing dissent in other
Mhm.
dragons and making them want things, and now he's done this thing. And eventually, like it comes to a head because the Lawrence wants Ferals and some other dragons to come with to fight Napoleon in Germany. Yeah, I think it's Germany.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because they
Um,
liberate, Berlin,
yes.
or
Yeah,
Berlin gets bombed. No, Dresden gets bombed. I don't remember, go ahead.
I don't remember. Anyway, and basically, there's this whole point that comes to a head where the governments are going to make a decision that is super bad for dragons again, and Lawrence ponies up with the accords that the dragons wrote, like what their demands were, and he basically strong arms all the nations into agreeing because like this is a crucial point, like it's making or breaking the war, and they need these other dragons, and they need because what they've discovered, oh, this is it, the Chinese have not been able to get there on time
Mhm.
because all the pharaohs in Europe that they have encountered have been fighting them, taking their supplies, doing skirmishes, and they realize this is a huge issue. The pharaohs are uprising. So Temeraire starts sending a bunch of his people out to go talk to these other. And there is one group, I forgot what country it was. I think it was Bulgarian. There's these Bulgarian pharaohs that uh, Napoleon came and talked to and were like, here's all the good things that are happening. You just need to do these battles. And then they did them and they kept fighting, but none of the good things happened. Like they did what Napoleon wanted, but they didn't get anything out of it. And
Also,
now
they didn't like fighting. They were just like, "Yeah, we don't really like it," which I think is kind of an interesting. There's an undercurrent sometimes throughout the books that, like, the feral dragons have not been bred for domesticity and aggression like the breeds we think of as dragons, and I always kinda thought that was interesting and that the ferals don't necessarily want to do these things
no,
all
they
the
just
time.
want to survive.
Or like
Uh,
Persietta, who just doesn't like fighting, like, that's just a thing, she's just
yeah.
afraid of it. The thing about this whole dragon.
Oh, that's what it is. The all the countries want to put out poison food to kill all the pharaohs and like
Oh,
just
right.
decimate them. And Lawrence is like absolutely not. So you think Lawrence is about to go in and do another uh
Dragon
treason.
cure. Yeah.
Yeah, do a treason moment, and Temeraire is worried about it. And like literally there's this whole fight where like the captains the one captain who didn't like Lawrence and who was like, he's doing treason again. Like they get all the dragons to sit around Temeraire, and Temeraire's like, really, guys, you're because Lawrence and like one of the ways they've been controlling the captains was by giving the dragons money by because whatever prize money they took, they would parcel it out
Oh,
by
and
who
they
listened
loved
the best.
listening to the list of why they were getting the money, and the captains are all really bored, and the dragons are like, "You're not listening, it's really
And they're
important."
super embarrassed. This one captain is being a dick, and his dragon is like hiding him behind his
Yeah,
leg.
I love how they're
And
ravens, essentially.
yeah, and there's literally a point where the one dragon disobeys his captain because what his captain said was wrong and would have affected Temeraire, and he didn't want to do that because he did that before. His captain told him not to do something, and it affected Temeraire. And so this dragon, you see a dragon learning to be independent, and he still loves his captain, but he's not going to just listen to his captain. But anyway, so Lawrence, what he does is instead of like treasoning, he just goes to them and he's like, listen, your solution is to kill all the pharaohs. That will make our dragons angry. It will make every dragon. You think the other nations that are run by
Mhm.
dragons are ever gonna fuck around with us? I'm saying this, even though this happens off scene. We don't get
Yes,
this
we
scene.
assume
I
this is
really
what
would
he's
have
saying.
liked to. This is what I
Again,
assume happens.
I think she ran out of page space because, again, there's a lot of scenes that just sort of
Which I
happen.
mean, such a cool scene. And
Yeah.
basically, he comes back and he's like, "I got everyone to agree to your accord. Like all the nations that are currently with us right now have agreed." And they're like, "Oh, awesome, yay!" So they end up they get Napoleon. There's this weird moment where Hammond is talking to this one French dude, and Lawrence is like, "What? Why are you talking to that one
French
Talleyrand?
dude.
Why are you doing that?" And basically, in the last battle, they are fighting. They're almost going to lose, but then somebody lets Temeraire know that there's a bunch of Swana dragons, like 60 Swana dragons, that are poised that look like they're going to come around. Uh,
In the back.
Napoleon's rear, because they technically had won the battle and they weren't going to press because it wouldn't have gone well because they don't have enough forces to press him that hard. But then when they find out about the Swana dragons, they're like, no, this is our chance. Like we have to take a risk. We don't know 100% what the Swana dragons are doing, but we're going to assume they're going, because they're positioning themselves at his rear, that they're going to attack him. This is our chance to get Napoleon. So the Swana attack. Temeraire goes in to get it, and at the last minute, the Incan dragons just fuck off and start fighting the French, like out of nowhere, like after the Swana attack. And so that's how they win. They end up capturing Napoleon, but they do it because the Swana came in last minute, and then the Incans last minute uh, fought. And so the next morning, everything says like, "Oh, Temeraire and Captain Lawrence flew in through an army of 100 dragons and got the emperor and single-handedly ended the war." And Lawrence is like, "Why are they telling that dumb version of the story? Like, that's a really dumb version of the story to tell
Mhm.
people. Why are they doing that?" And Lawrence goes to kind of like figure it out, but Hammond is like,
There's a great scene where he goes to see Napoleon and he's
"Yeah,
not sure why he's going to see him, and Napoleon, like, kinda, like, isn't sure either, and then he's like, "I understand, you came because you can't apologize, but we fought a battle together here. What was it like from your perspective?" And
yeah."
again, Napoleon is such an interesting character the way she writes him.
Yeah, because he's not bitter. Like Lawrence is literally a
Yeah.
huge reason of why he just lost this war, but he's not. He doesn't blame Lawrence. He knows Lawrence was doing and he literally says, "My only regret is that you were not fighting on my side, and
Mhm.
that we could not have been in it together." And then Hammond, Talleyrand, and this other guy come in to talk to him and give him terms, and the terms are basically, you will be. They give him a letter from his wife, the Empress of the
The
Seppa Inca.
Incan. Yeah.
Yes,
Who
and
is
they
now in
give him.
France and has had a child and is pregnant with another one.
Yes, they basically say, "Here's the letter from your wife." He reads it, and then they say, "You have to go into isolation on this island. You could go with Liane, but you're never getting off that island, and you're never going back to France. But your son will get to be emperor." And carry on the line. Your wife will be his regent in the meantime,
France
and
gets to keep its pre-war borders in, like,
there's
some other town or
all
something
that
like that.
jazz. And he does it. And Lawrence is sitting there like, "That's fucking weird. What, that is generous. That's way more that's more generous than we would have given during times when we really hated that guy. What is going on?" And he's also mad at the Suppa Inca now because now he realizes that she betrayed him, and now she gets to be like position her son as king, blah blah blah. So then there's this point where he has dinner with the Suppa Inca because like she's the Empress of France now, and everybody's like, "Hi, Empress of France." And she's also, the queen. Like her army in the Incan army is just insane, and she is Lawrence is pissed. Like, how dare you betray your husband? You claimed, like, how dare you? That's such a dick move. And then she talks to him and she's like, "I didn't have a choice. The thing about my husband is he would never have stopped if he had lost that battle, and we argued a different way and didn't, like, he would never have stopped. It was
Mhm.
never going to end well. I realized that the best way to give him what he would have wanted, because he couldn't make this choice for himself, which is to have France's, for his line to continue the thing of, I had to get him captured because he would have run himself and France and our entire empire into the ground. And I know that because I love him and he's my fucking husband. This was my way to make sure he got the thing he would have wanted, that he would never have made the decision to do."
Well, he would never have
And
been able to, yeah, stop.
yeah,
To protect him from himself, essentially.
and he realizes in that moment, like, oh, she's right. He Napoleon, they all knew this. Napoleon never would have stopped. So if they would have retreated and gone with the, like, it would have just kept going and going, and it would have been perpetual. Or eventually he would have lost in a way where they got nothing. But as long as she said, because, and the deal was not, I will just give him to you, but if it looks like we cannot win, I will make sure you get Napoleon. Like
Right.
if it looks like we're gonna lose the war, I will make sure you get Napoleon immediately. And that's why the Ancient Dragons only like changed sides when the
The Swana
Swan
showed up.
Dragons came in, because before then they still had a fighting chance. And it was to make sure that her husband would, number one, survive, and number two, get some of what he would want.
Which
You
is his
know?
son as emperor, which is,
Yeah.
pretty cool. And then basically, that happens, and then they go off to England, and Lawrence retires.
Retires
Him and
from
Temeraire
the
retire,
military.
and they go to his house, and they're on the farm that they get, and they're like, okay, we helped out this winter with like harvest and shit, but like there's not a lot to do here. And
This is a
Temeraire's like,
very successful
"Well, yeah, we're not
lance.
needed, and it's weird
Yeah.
to not have a purpose. And then basically, Temeraire decides, okay, I'm gonna go be in Parliament. He gets like or he goes to see Tharkay, and they
No,
get
Tharkay comes. They're literally just sitting there
yeah,
having
I
this
know.
conversation. Tharkay appears and is like, "Hey guys, so Parliament is being kind of dickish, where they agreed to give you 20 more dragon seats, but they've separated in ways where there's like no dragons living in those areas, and those areas are controlled by other people, so you can't get in there. But I happen to have an estate in one of those areas, so a bunch of you could just come and live on my estate, and that's how you'll get your seats. And so will you come and like help? Because Tharkay was the illegitimate son of
Yeah,
a lord,
British
and
lord.
he's been fighting for his inheritance, and he's finally gotten it now, and it includes this big estate that needs like help and needs work. And while Lawrence doesn't really like, he's kind of fine chilling. He knows Temeraire wants something to do, and being politically involved is huge, so they're like, yeah, we'll come and live with you. And that's how the book ends.
Okay, so in terms of just this specific
I
ending,
like that ending.
I think it's a good ending, but I think it's lacking in. I mean, I don't think Temeraire would be good in. He's not political quite enough. He's not. I don't think he's gonna do well in Parliament. But besides that, there is no real grappling with the idea that Lawrence is gonna die, and
And
probably in like
that
20
needed
or
to
30 years.
happen.
Yeah, especially because this is such a long. This is like one of those books where like it's about the life of a person essentially, and so it makes sense that Tamara would have to grapple with it. It didn't even necessarily have to be that in terms of character growth, but I think that would have been the most organic direction for it to go, and it needed to have some kind of character growth. And so like if maybe he was more okay with Lawrence marrying, or like living slightly more apart, or just some kind of action that showed that he was more
And
okay
coming
with
to
that.
terms. Yeah, it was super needed. There's so many little threads that don't get tied up.
It's annoying. And the other thing is like this last book, I love it. I love military fiction, but like a lot of the normal cast isn't there. Nothing happens with Demani and Emily Rowland. They're just like, her mom is like, yeah, it's gonna suck for them. They're not gonna be able to get together. At least we got to see Rowland at some point. That was
Yeah,
nice.
we don't get Lily and
We
that
get
other
them for one
captain.
scene.
Yeah, but like we don't get a,
Yeah,
or like a really nice reunite with Berkeley and Berkeley's dragon companion,
Maximus.
or like what they're going to do. Like it's really weird, because like there are things that have been so recurring and regular that just feel like
Hmm.
we don't get it. Almost like there was supposed to be another book, and like we
Yeah.
follow the political journey that they're going on, and then like maybe Temeraire, because he's Temeraire, starts doing like vigilante Batman shit
That would have been
behind
cool.
Lawrence's back, and Lawrence is like, Temeraire, we spoke about this, like something like that. And it feels like I want fan fiction, but at the same time there just are so many tiny little threads that we don't, like, we never see Damani on screen.
Yeah, he left. We don't see him since the
The
end of
end of
middle of
two books, we don't see him, we don't see Kulangile. We don't get to know like how they're doing, like how is Sifo coping with, he's part of this crew, he's black in Britain, in Europe, in a stage, and like his brother's got a giant dragon, but how is he finding his place? And there's so many little things that I felt like could have been wrapped up better. Or like the lady who came to be Emily's chaperone.
Yeah, I loved her, and she never does really anything.
It doesn't. There's so many little tiny threads that have been here the entire time, or for books and books that we get nothing about. Like, and it just really like sucks.
Yeah, again, I think the book she ran out of pages for the plot she wanted. Because again, there's a bunch of battles where like we'll start in the middle or it'll end. Like we don't get to see the moment he captures Napoleon. Like there,
Yep.
Leanne picks up Napoleon and runs, and Temeraire is following, and then Napoleon is captured beginning of next chapter. And like it kind of works. Again, it doesn't not work. It works good in terms of the pacing, but it makes me think that she was running out of pages to tell this story.
Yep.
I think honestly, in terms of the series as a whole, what she should have done is either A, ended at Victory of Eagles and just captured Napoleon instead of letting Napoleon escape, or she should have had the Swanna ending of that plot line, which kind of just again I found very unsatisfying in terms of like they're just like, and now we're all gonna be friends. That should have
But
been,
the thing is, the Swans aren't like, they still don't like the British. They were just like, we just disliked Napoleon more. Like,
which
we
is
don't give
worse.
a
It
shit.
just ends. Like it just
Yeah.
ends with like they're like, yeah, you Europeans divide up the world a lot. We're not gonna do that. I think one way to fix it would have been instead of the whole Inca thing, again, Napoleon marries a Swanna empress or something like that, and then we can skip Crucible of Gold completely. And like we could have also skipped all of Australia, and then essentially we have could have actually no, you do kind of need Blood of Tyrants. We could have skipped Japan.
We could have skipped the Japan plotline. But the thing is, for me, well, the first time I read this, I was really taken aback with how, like, we were in the middle of a battle, and then, like, we just had captured Napoleon. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize, like, this was the end. Nothing about the book felt like we were working towards a climax of anything, partially because there were still so many other things that were unresolved. Like, and it was just really weird, and especially because the climax is not, like, the capture of Napoleon, it's just the battle that happened beforehand. And so the first time I read it, I actually was like, "Oh, that was so fast!" And you're right. This book goes by too quickly. This
Mm-hmm.
book feels like it should have been two books, and I think if you would have cut Crucible of Gold and the Australia book, like you mentioned, because honestly, the Australia book lends nothing. Even the Incan one, because like if you look at the Incan one in the relation of like you end up with the Incan Empress, and how that impact, that's fine. Australia literally adds nothing to the plot of the
Mm-hmm.
entire book. You could have completely just gotten rid of that. Like maybe he was on his way to Australia to be transported, and then something happens, and he ended up in the Incan. Like
I expected there would be so much more falling action, and I don't think she had enough time for it. Or even a simpler fix: skip the Japan part. That gives you another third to that book. That could have moved the third to the first third
because
of
it
this book
just
into that one.
feels so rushed. It really
Yeah.
does. By the time you get to the end, like especially because how much other things and other books got so much time, and
Mm-hmm.
the ending just feels like it comes out of nowhere, and then there wasn't enough falling action. The falling action was very brief. We get a lot of loose threads that aren't fully tied up. And again, if this was not the last book, or like, and join us for series 2, the political Temeraire Chronicles, like, okay, that's fine. So yeah, it was weird because like I really enjoyed the last book, and because I knew this was gonna be the last book this time, where last time I was like, what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're
What?
more
It
expecting of
ended.
it.
I enjoyed it more this time than I did the first time. But it's still like it's one of those things where you see the potential, and it feels like some books shouldn't have happened, and then this book should have maybe been too.
No, it's totally true. It's totally true. And that's, again, Novik is such a talented writer. She's been able to make it work. Again, I read the last book in a day, the other books, I think, in 1 or 2 days each. But the macro level problems are undeniable. And it's interesting because they're not really problems she has in the other books that she's written. She has different problems in those books. Like there are things about those I don't love as much. But like she was much more able to handle things in Uprooted and Spinning Silver in terms of character growth and the arc, and even Deadly Education. That worked fine. Like the stakes worked there, everything. I mean, I do have complaints about the last book, but so it's again, I think she had the series concepted. She'd written out a bunch of cool cultures, and she was like, okay, up until book 5, this will be the plot, the character arc, and then I'll come up with some more stuff for the back half. And it was like, you don't actually have enough in the back half to do that.
Unfortunately, because as we said in the beginning, Lawrence's growth as a person, pretty much after book 5,
Mm-hmm.
where we,
Done.
we got Lawrence, and then the only other thing that happened, like the amnesia thing comes in. But again, that doesn't add, like, he doesn't become a different person post amnesia because of the amnesia. Like, none of that.
Yeah,
Like,
it doesn't give him, like, a new perspective on things or make Temeraire realize, like, "Oh, this is what my life would be without Lawrence," or something like that, so, I if you like this I don't know, I was gonna say, you should read it or not read it, but if you've gotten to the end of this review, you should know if you wanna read it or not. I mean, I've talked about it for 4 hours,
it's so good.
it
I
really is,
really
though.
enjoyed it. Like, we both mentioned complaints, but it really is such a fun read. Like, if you just want a fun read and, like, you don't think about it too hard, because then you start thinking about this other stuff. Like, it's great, and it's interesting because I realized the first time I read it, I did not think this hard about it. And one of the things that did it was I was talking to my friend Steven when we just started this reread, and he was like, "What's your take on the different dragon cultures and how she ends up deciding capitalism is the best?" And I was like, "The fuck? What? What?" And he was like, "Yeah, each of the different cultures." And, like, granted, he had read this 2 years ago, so it was insane that he had thought about it this much. And, like,
Mhm.
the first time I was like, because I read it just for funsies, and he literally was like, because technically the British system is communism, but not like a very nice
Good.
communism.
Yeah.
And then the Chinese is just capitalism. There's dragons who starve. Meanwhile, in Britain, there's no dragons who starve. And you see all these cultures that have different ways of dealing with it. And he talked about how, like, none of them were really perfect. Like, he doesn't like the capitalism. And then we talked about Africa and how basically deifying dragons isn't the answer either.
By the
Um,
way, it's actually gaslighting. They're telling the dragons they are something they're not, and, like, I get that that's all of religion, but, like, really think about, like, if you're telling someone you're a reincarnated person, like, that's sort of abusive. Again, all religions are sort of abusive when you get down to it in terms of, like, "Hey, you're gonna die, like, this is a sin, you're gonna be burning in hell forever," like, but anyway, but, like, in terms of, like, it's not the perfect system it's kind of portrayed as in the books.
And then the Incan system would be better, except now that the Incans have gone through that terrible thing, now they're collecting humans, which
Mhm.
isn't ideal either. Like they weren't like the old Incan system, in my opinion, might have been the best system, and it's just really. And I went, I didn't think about any of that the first time I read it, and so this time I came into it with that, and also because we were reading it for the podcast, and, like, we have to pay attention. Like, I don't think people realize that on when left to my own devices, I'm not as nitpicky as I can be for this
Yeah.
podcast. um I can be. It's funny, the things that just enrage me and that I will be nitpicky about. Like, I watched a movie with the my boyfriend, and he really likes the one female character, and I was like, "Nah, I don't like her. That was
Which movie?
really fucked up." It's called Sweet November, and
Oh.
it's from the early 2000s, and it's basically like Manic Pixie Dream Girl, like, the early.
Mhm.
And it's
That before people knew it was a trope.
yeah, yeah, before it was a trope, and it was Keanu Reeves and Charlize Theron, and I did not like Charlize Theron's character. She was like, "You're broken. I will fix you." Like, you know how Manic Pixie Dream Girls
Yeah.
normally do the thing, but she verbally was like, "You have to live with me for a month, and I'll fix you and help you." And he's like, "Why would you do that?" And I was just, and, like, she gives his clothing away to a hobo because he needs to live differently, and I'm like, "Why are we idealizing?" And he was just like, and you could see on his face that he was like, you're going real hard for this rom com. Like, and because I'm talking about, what does it say about a culture when we, because some people, they like being business, they like being devoted to their job, they do better with high stakes, stressful environments.
Mhm.
Like, why are we idealizing a woman who basically doesn't
Is a
do
hobo.
anything for a living, and like, walks dogs? Like, why is that kind of? And he's like, I don't know if, and he's right, it's not, that's not what the movie's trying to do or say. But I just got really, like, nitpicky about it.
I'm like that too. I noticed it especially when I would read fan fiction is I would just, like, gobble it through and not even really pay attention to, like, a lot of it, or I noticed it especially with, like, prose. Like, I just would not notice the prose. It was I mean, they would be good or bad, but, like, I would not be able to isolate what I thought about them because I was just reading it so
Reading it,
fast.
yeah.
I think that's actually a very normal human thing is just to accept what the book tells you until you're in an analytic framework. And so, yeah, I mean, again, all the world building stuff didn't bother me the first time I read this, and this time it did. Part of it is because just I've grown since then as well. But so before we go though, let's rank the books.
Okay,
We're gonna have different ones, but worst book for me is
Australia.
Australia, number one, awful.
Okay.
All right, second worst for you.
Tied between Africa and Inca.
Yeah, same. Those are 8 or 7, just it doesn't really
And the
matter.
thing is, they are infinitely better. They're both infinitely better than the
Yes.
Australia book for me, and they're both decent reads. Like don't think.
Mhm.
And again, there's things about both I really really like. So don't take it like don't look at that and be like, oh, it's just Australia's down here, and then those
Yeah.
two are like up here together.
Yeah,
Like there's
there's a
still
gulf
there's a
between
big
them.
gulf between. And then I think it would be Blood of Tyrants.
Yeah, I agree. And then I would say Throne of Jade, which is the China one.
Yeah, the second book, Throne of Jade,
Uh-huh.
and then I would say,
I actually think we're gonna
let me
agree
start
except
from
for
the
one. Yeah, and then from the top, I would put Victory of Eagles, in Napoleon Invasion.
I don't know, the first book for me is my top one. I love it so much. I would say Victory
Really?
of Eagles objectively is better. I would say Victory of Eagles is objectively
That's
better.
interesting because mine
And
mine would go Victory of Eagles, League of Dragons, Black Powder War, first one.
honestly, I think I might because Black Powder War and League of Dragons, I would say would be number two. It is fantastic. It is such a good
Right.
book.
Even with all the
Honestly,
complaints we had.
as much as I enjoy the first one personally most, I do agree that I think League of Dragons because League of Dragons has the whole growth of not League of Dragons. Victory of
Black
Eagles
Powder
has that
War?
whole growth.
Oh, Victory
No,
of Eagles. Right,
Victory
yeah,
of
yeah.
Eagles has the whole growth of post treason Lawrence dealing with
Mhm.
that stuff. It also has, which I think is the most fascinating part, the unification of the dragons of Britain to like fight but be
Dragon Army.
independent, which is fantastic. Okay, so I'll agree. I'll agree.
Victory of
Victory of
Eagles,
Eagles,
League of
League of
Dragons,
Dragons.
Black Powder War for me, but with the caveat that I only like the part in Prussia. Because to me, like, at that point, the military this was, like, the first really good military fiction part she wrote, and there's, like
I would put Black Powder War and Blood of Tyrants on the same level because they
oh,
both have halves that are really good.
see, I would not put Blood of Tyrants because Blood of Tyrants for me, I find the Japan part boring, could
You
jettison
find
it.
the first part of Black
That's a
Powder
good
War
point.
boring.
I would
Like
say
Black Powder War, the part you like only starts halfway through the book. The first half is them traveling from China and
yeah,
going across the Silk Road.
and they meet Tharke.
Yes, I'm
That's a good
telling
point.
you, if you went back and
Okay,
read
I
it,
don't know.
both
I don't
books
know.
have
I
the
love
same
that
thing for
Prussia
you.
part.
You don't like the first part, you like the second part.
But I
Because if you
think I
like the
like the
Russian
second
part,
part better in Black Powder War than
okay, so
than
Black
Blood of
Powder
Tyrants.
War for
But
you,
okay.
then Blood of Tyrants, or then the first book.
I think the first book. I actually
Yeah,
really
and
do
then
like the
Blood of
first book.
Tyrants.
Yeah, that would be it for me. And you would swap Blood of Tyrants and Black Powder War? Or no,
I would
you would
put them on
probably
the
put
same level, and
y
I would put the first book above Black
the
Powder War and Blood of Tyrants because I find it throughout object like from beginning to
You
end.
know
I
what?
find the first book
Objectively,
more
yes, it's
interesting.
a better book.
Yeah, it
Objectively,
is.
it's a better book. But if I was
So
to reread it, I would just read the back half of Black Powder War again because I love that. It's so good. The Russians
exactly,
are
but that's my
losing
point.
and it's
Is
cold
the
and
first
there's
book is consistently good the whole way
yeah,
through. So it's Victory of Eagles, League of Dragons, the
His
first
Majesty's
book,
Dragon,
Dragon. Then it's Black Powder War and
Flash, Blood of
slash
Tyrants.
Blood of Tyrants. And then for Will, Black Powder War would be above and Blood of Tyrants below. Then it would be the
Crucible of Gold and the Empire of Ivory.
Empire of Ivory, and then
Well, no, Throne of Jade
Australia.
actually above those.
Oh yes,
Throne of
Throne of Jade is
Jade,
above. Yes, yes, Throne of Jade.
um,
Then
then those two, and then way below it, Australia.
Australia. I
I
don't
think that's
even
a good
remember the
list.
Australia. The Tongues of Serpents.
Tongues of Serpents, yes, which makes
Yes,
it actually does if you think of it as the whole plot was that the Yellow Reaper was gonna be speaking, so tongues as
yes,
language, tongues of
yeah,
serpents, that's actually clever. But the rest of but it's just such a bad
yeah.
book.
It's not, like it still has the good parts, but it's so boring. It's like what happens if a really good writer just goes off on a tangent too long.
In Australia too, which is worse. So yeah, I think that's actually a very good ranking.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let
we
us
didn't
know
mention
if you've read this. Let us know your
yeah, do
ranking.
you like Australia? So there's a subscribe button below that you can unclick to unsubscribe from our channel if you do.
Don't do
Um,
that, please.
also join our Patreon. We have a Patreon. We didn't mention it till
Oh God, why do
two
we
hours and
never
15
mention it
minutes.
until the end?
We've been better about it lately, but
We have.
join. There's a book club. You get to pick one of the books we read, and then we do it as a live stream. Me and Katie are doing close readings and critiques of actual like
Writing.
prose writing because we talk about a lot of macro issues here, but we wanted to talk more about scene to scene and prose level. Um, she was talking yesterday about a sentence fragment agreement, hanging parsible, and I was like, yes, I know what you're talking about.
Participle, but yes. Yeah.
Yes. And yeah, so that's a good time as well. You get that in our parasocial darling tier. Any last thoughts?
It's a good book. Series. I would, if you can get through the first book, you'll enjoy the series. If the first book is too boring for you, you're
Yeah,
not
that's actually a really
gonna.
good point. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to get through the rest of it. There's actually, I think, another book she wrote of like short stories in the universe, that collects some
Ooh.
short stories, and then it has one after Lawrence dies, I think. And then there's an alternate history where Temeraire turns into like a dragon, or no, not a dragon, into a pirate, and then he meets Lawrence later. So that might be interesting to read at some point, though we probably
Yeah.
wouldn't do a video on it. Let us know. Talk to y'all later.
Bye, guys.